Welcome to Air Checks. Here is more of the Jean Shepherd Marathon on WO or in New York City. From April 9, 1960, Jean tells the story of Coney Island, the man in the batting cage, a visit to Germany, the Cincinnati Human Fly, grandmother's eyeglasses, Excelsior, you fathead.
It's like that short, fat guy I saw one time over in Coney Island. I've only been to Coney Island 2 times. And it's significant to report that each of the 2 times brought a cleaner milestone into my life. If you look around, you can see these milestones everywhere. Now, they're not really milestones. They're just small toothpicks sticking out at random from the vast canopy of existence. Just a little caviar there, and a little of the fried bacon. Well, of course, it takes many forms. Like this friend of mine was driving along Broadway on a beautiful summer Sunday afternoon. He's driving along there, and there's an air of as though, in a sense, things have been deserted on Broadway on a summer Sunday afternoon, when he looked out of his car window and he saw a small monkey pounding on the door of a bar that was closed. This was Upper Broadway, up around the 80s and 90s. And this monkey is pounding away at the door. The monkey knew exactly what he was after, and he's pounding at this door. My friend just continued to drive on, his face averted, because he wished to retain the sight of a solitary, small, underage monkey on a Sunday afternoon pounding on the door of a closed bar on Upper Broadway. This has meaning, I guess. It's like, you know, there is a trick to it. Not really a trick. Some people do, some people don't. Some people have the ability to walk through life, to kind of absorb it and reflect it and feel it churning inside of them, walk through life with the feeling that they have just been given the car for the first time by their old man. It's a summer afternoon. They have just learned to drive, and they are venturing out on their own, the first solo flight. All of their life, they can keep this beautiful, beautiful, clear mirror before them. And then there's the rest of the people, the great horde of the disenchanted. Of course, if you're going to face it, there are those 2 types, the enchanted and the disenchanted. And the enchanted are the ones who, of course, are slowly but surely being ground under heel, who will eventually be totally extinct. I got a letter from this guy, Jim, the other day, and he said, Shepherd, you realize, of course, that natural selection and the evolutionary process will eventually make your type of man totally extinct. The questioners, the believers will finally win out in the end. Well, you know, it's like the second time I went to Coney Island. I'm walking along, and they have a batting cage there. One of these cages where you put a quarter in the slot, and this pitching machine pitches 10 balls at you. And you stand up, old worn Louisville Slugger. Have you seen that thing? And you swing away at it, 10 of them. And you can pick the kind of pitch you want. And you can set the meter. And there's one that says slow lobber. It just throws a lob ball. You know, the kind that fat guys playing the skinny guys at the picnic. This kind of a ball. And then there's an underhand pitch by a left-hander. Slow, easy, comes in right over the plate. But it's not quite a lobber. You can set it all the way on up to Carl Hubble-type fastball. Ryan Dern dusts you off. And I'm standing there, I'm telling you an exact story. This is truly what happened. I'm not embellishing this one bit. I want to see somebody. Of course, I don't have the guts to step up to the plate, because I'm afraid of machines anyway, really. No, I'd like to again qualify that. I am not afraid of machines. As a matter of fact, I enjoy many machines. One of the most amusing aspects of the type of writer who writes for the New Yorker or many other magazines of that type is that he must always profess an inability to deal with any type of machine. Well, I think this is a kind of a childish attitude, because most of us can deal with machines of one kind or another. It's when the machine begins to deal with us, of course, that the situation reverses itself. This whole theory was brought out by Thurber. Thurber's one of the great propounders of this. Well, of course, I don't understand how the little buttons work, and I press a button and the thing happens, and it's a kind of feminine helplessness in the face of the things which we have created. But be that as it may, I'm walking along there, you see, and I see this batting cage. Now, this is a thing that has a deep primeval interest to all men. It's in a sense, it is a synthesis of life, which is a challenge, of course. With some machine off there in the darkness throwing fastballs down over the inside corner of the plate. And we better swing, boy. You don't get another one. And it's a synthesis. And you put it in, everybody starts out with the same thing. Quarter in a slot. Throw it in there. It's like that big Mike Todd party. I'll never forget that. You put a quarter in the slot, you start out, everybody starts out the same. Mike Todd, guys living in the Bronx, other guys who learn how to be airplane pilots, guys who play second base for the everybody starts out with the same quarter, see? And I'm walking along that street in Coney Island. And by the way, I'd like to recommend this. If you ever go to Coney Island on the days when Coney Island really isn't working. The kind of off days, like at the end of the season or before the season really begins, then you in a sense, get much more of a clear picture of what mankind is up to when he creates these vast seaside Babylonian bacchanal centers. And I'm walking along and I see this batting cage over there. Now, for those of you who don't know what it is, a batting cage in the Coney Island sense is a cage. It's a big cage, and down at the other end of the cage, let's say the nether end of the cage, there's a big green curtain. And this green curtain says home run, or it says pop-up, out, strikeout, that kind of thing. You see, wherever you hit the ball and you drive it up against that green curtain tells what kind of hit you got or what kind of out you made. And next to the home plate, there is a home plate down at our end of the cage. Next to the home plate is a rack that has maybe 25 terrible old clubs. They're not even bats, they're clubs, which is incidentally also, I believe, very symbolic of our life. So he the customer picks up one of these clubs, he pays his quarter, puts it in the slot, and sets the machine down at the other end, down there by that green curtain down there is a machine that throws baseballs at you. This machine does this. And this machine throws baseballs at you, and you can set a dial to determine what kind of balls you want thrown at you. Now, this is a perfect situation for the guy who's really working. Now, if you were to pick the kind of curveballs you want thrown at you in life, what kind would you pick? I mean, what kind do you hit the best? I mean, assuming that there is an element of chance in everybody's life, no matter how it's worked. What kind of curveballs would you want thrown at you? Well, let me tell you what happens. Generally speaking, you figure that you'd put in the quarter and you'd set the machine to throw these little looping balls that are thrown at you at the skinny guy, fat guy picnic softball game, you know? But the actual secret of it is when you're faced with it, you don't. You really don't. Because every man secretly likes to think that he is a Viking, standing at the prow of the ship, about to meet the biggest dragon in the Western Hemisphere, and he's going to deal with him as best he can with a very small but very agile, very wiry lance. And so here I'm standing there waiting for some guy to come along, and it's one of those vaguely watery Saturday afternoons late in the season, after the last Ferris wheel rider has sort of disappeared in the distance and the last kid with the Nathan hot dog has disappeared. And Coney Island is slowing up, and it's the beginnings of October or November or something. There's a little cold air in it. And along comes a little guy. It's a true thing, and I'll remember this to the dying day, because I had implications of it this morning as I'm coming through Times Square, the watery sunlight coming down, and the fountains of Rome still ringing in my ears. Do you know how it is to sit next to the Fontana di Trevi, and watch nothing but like starlings, tremendous hordes of starstruck Katharine Hepburn type tourists gathering by the millions and throwing quarters into this gigantic pot full of water. And I'm standing there watching this, and my mind goes back immediately to this little short fat man who somehow got himself involved with Coney Island on a Saturday afternoon. And he's working his way towards the sea, like all good lemmings. He's working his way, in a solo way, toward the sea. All of us, in one way or another, do work our way toward the sea, pulled ever by the primordial life. And so he's working his way down towards the sea, and I'm standing across the street, waiting to see who's going to play this batting cage thing. And he stops and he looks in. He looks around and he notes that there are hardly anyone on the street. He can get away with it this time. And by the way, I think most of us, if we were given the choice, would play out our lives in absolute privacy so that no one suspects what we're doing. Now, this is all connected with the concept of original sin. And so he's standing there looking the business over, reaches in his pocket and pulls out a quarter. And he pops inside the cage, throws his quarter in the slot, and looks back at the rack and picks himself out a bat. One of these great big worn clubs with tape on the handle. And it is interesting to note that he picked one of the largest bats in the rack. This little short, round man who had long since had gone past the 45-year milepost long before. He picks up one of these tape bats and steps up to the plate. And I couldn't see how he had set the machine. And I figured, naturally, he's going to get this little lobbing ball that flies out from the fat man and the skinny man pitcher there. And the next thing I knew, this machine and let one go. You see, you set the meter, and the end meter all the way over at the end says Carl Hubble Bob Feller. That's nothing but a fast straight ball right over the outside corner of the plate, waist high. And he sets this thing, and it goes like that. It went past him like a shot, and his bat just moved slightly. He steps up to the plate, kicks the dirt a little bit. He's waiting for the next one. I figured he's going to set the machine again, He's waiting for the next one. He chokes up a little bit on the bat and hunches down over the plate. And you hear the machine going, and it goes into the catcher's mitt back of it. They had a big concrete catcher's mitt. And he looks down, steps back out of the box, and hitches up his pants. That's 2 strikes. Steps back into the box, and this time he chokes up on the bat a little more, hunches over, and I can see all of his old kid baseball playing is coming into the picture again. This time he's kicking the dirt a little bit and hunching his left shoulder down. This time he keeps the bat sort of half over the plate, hunched like Eddie Stanky used to. Eddie Stanky was not a naturally good batter. He just kept the bat hanging out over the plate all the time, and if the ball hit it, well, he was off, you see. That's the way he batted. And this is the way the guy's hunched down over there, and I can see this guy's been playing life like this all the time. And he just ticked it, a foul tip that skitters off to the left of the plate and into the screen. He steps back, he got a piece of it that time. He's got 7 more coming now. You get 10 balls for a quarter. And suddenly the machine wound up and threw him a change of pace. A small, easy, looping inside curveball, and he missed it. He swung like that, and he stepped back and protested the decision. Oh, what a beautiful drama of man's inability to cope with his own ambitions. Speaking of ambitions and the inability to cope, this is WOR, AM and FM, New York. We'll be here until 2 o'clock this afternoon. Now the point that we're making here, which of course is no point at all, because most of life doesn't have much point, if you're ever going to be really objective about it. It's the sense that you can find, if you look carefully, you can find a monkey pounding at all the closed doors of all the upper Broadways on every Sunday afternoon of life. And I'm standing there last week. I'm beginning, as you notice, but slowly but surely that long rubber band is beginning to pull me back into the vortex of the now, where we live at this time. And it's interesting to me to note that most people prefer me the other way, with my other self off somewhere in Bulgaria or Brussels and me here. Which this is an implied, I don't know, is it an implied rejection or acceptance? I can't detect which. And it seems like just about 3 or 4 hours ago, Well, I did something. I'd like to recommend something to you. And this has nothing, I will put a disclaimer on it immediately. This is no commercial. I did not, I don't know anything about the people who ran it, or in fact, all I did was go down and plunk down my money right there at the box office and go in. And there was a reason for it. That is why I wanted to see this. I was in Frankfurt, Germany, about, it was last Thursday, as a matter of fact. I was there off and on during this trip I took. The reason Frankfurt was because Frankfurt is the home base of the airlines on which I flew to Europe and back. Incidentally, I'll get the commercial right out of the way right now. That particular airlines was Lufthansa. And if you're looking for a really wonderful trip to Central Europe on the Boeing 707 jets, you know, we set a world's record, did I tell you, on the way over there? From Idlewild Airport. Very peculiar to be involved in a world record thing and know that they're trying for a world record when you're sitting in the seat. But we flew from Idlewild to Frankfurt, Germany in 6 hours and 56 minutes, which is kind of wild. It's a very rapid transit, all I can say. It has elements of all kinds of surrealistic parts of your life involved, but nevertheless, I flew via Lufthansa, and if you're planning to go to Europe this coming summer or spring, I would recommend a trip via this airlines. Excellent service, and they get you there. But anyway, I spent some time in Frankfurt, and I spent most of the time in a very old world type hotel. And there was talk all the time around this hotel of this new movie that was made, a new movie that had been made in and about this hotel and out in the courtyard next to it with the street and all that whole area, you see. And it was about a girl named Rosemary. You've probably read stories. Did you read the story about her in Life and that, and the big picture story taken from the movie? Well, the story, briefly, I'm not even going to tell you the story, but because the important thing about this movie is that more than any other movie that I've ever seen, or any piece of literature I've ever seen, I have a great faith in the movie as an art medium, as a medium for expressing things which cannot be expressed in any other area. They can go much beyond what Broadway can do. They can go certainly far beyond television, and I think beyond almost any other medium, with the single exception, perhaps, of the novel, and I have to say this, the spoken word, because both of them can evoke great images within the imagination and probably other areas of your mind that cannot be evoked any other way. However, I'm standing in my hotel room, and I had no idea of what this was about, and I was about on the 4th or 5th floor, and they have big windows in this hotel, big swinging windows with very light, gauzy, white curtains. And I swung the windows back. And Germany, by and large, is a sunny country. It's cold, but seems to me, more sun than we have during the winter time, during cold weather. And I swung the window open because it was a brilliantly sunny day, and the sun was hitting down in a concrete courtyard next to me, next to the hotel. And across from this courtyard, there was a brand new, some kind of it looked like a very genteel sort of factory, not a real factory, but something where some office building or some kind of industrial thing was going on. But it was kind of vaguely, there's something even rural about many of the cities in Germany. Strangely enough, in the middle of all of this peculiar work and great driving energy that's going on. So I'm standing there looking down, and I looked down in this court there for a while, and it had an odd look of a set anyway, because of the way the big concrete abutments cut down, and you could see the light, a shaft of light hitting down on the concrete driveway. And I just looked down and looked at the sun and heard the sound of the traffic off in the distance and a few birds and things. And while I was doing that, a maid walked in, and she was bringing in stuff like towels and that. And she walked in, and she saw me looking out of the window. She didn't say much. They never say much unless you say something to them. And I said, it's nice out there. And she said, that is where they shot the movie. I said, what? What movie is that? She says, well, the movie about Rosemary. You know about Rosemary? And I said, no, what about Rosemary? So she proceeded to tell me that in 1957 and 56, this girl Rosemary started right down there in that courtyard where she started her whole career, which became a very wildly talked about career, and at one time even threatened much of the economy of the area. She's a very interesting character. And so I went down the elevator, and I'm asking the elevator boy about this woman, Rosemary, and he knew all about it. All of them in the hotel knew. They had all been there for a long time, and they all knew all about her. And they were telling me stories about this woman. I've already done it. They were telling me stories about this woman. And so when I got back to the States, I went to see the movie, really primarily because I knew the area where it was shot, and I knew many of the types of people that were there. And I have never seen a more brilliant satire on a way of life, comments on yourself. You know, satire is a thing which is a very, and on one hand, it's a very ephemeral art form, and on the other hand, it's a dangerous art form, and it's a very difficult art form to really realize. Bad satire is awful. Good satire is brilliant. There's hardly any in between. And this satire, which is a satire on all the wildly industrial, strangely peculiar, in a sense almost, Chris, I think man is constantly worried with his conscience that the better off he has it in any country, the better off he has it. Right here, we have all the physical comforts of any place in the world. The better off he has it, the more he begins to develop a sneaking sense of conscience about it. Somehow he feels that he shouldn't have all this, you know? That the more a person begins to be, for example, wealthy people almost always develop a conscience as they get older and older about it. And they begin to do all sorts of things. They endow museums, they put money into Broadway plays, they send kids through college, they do all kinds of things, and then have a ghost come in and write their biography that tells how really they were great anyway. And there's always this sense, you see, that I shouldn't have this. And I found that the more a country begins to get this way, that big physical ownership of actual material property, the more it becomes concerned over its soul. And so here's Germany, you see. And one line in this picture was great. There were two industrialist wives, German industrialists sitting there talking, and they're sitting at the bar of this very, very fancy, decadent place. And one says to the other, "Oh, my husband Otto, my husband Otto has gone to Russia again on another one of his business trips." And the second wife says, "Well, he's gone to Russia a lot of times there, hasn't he?" And the first one says, "Oh, yes." And she's a great big fat woman. It was wonderful because just before that, she opened her mouth very wide, and she says, "Look at that, look at that. I have this most wonderful dentist. Look at those teeth there, a wonderful dentist. Every one of them is kept. Everyone, you'd never know it. Everyone is kept." And then she sits back in this kind of upholstered stool that she was revolving on, wearing her very fancy Parisian evening gown with pearls all over her, and she says, "Oh yes, my Otto, he is very well liked in Russia. In Russia, they can really appreciate an industrial capitalist." And it was a comment on both systems, and very funny. And this was definitely a beautiful satire on so much of the modern life, and including, by the way, the ability that many people have in Germany to completely forget the past very, very conveniently. And this is a beautiful piece of work, and if you have a chance to see it, see it. And I'd like to point out another thing, too, about it. But if you know anything about the theater, Bertolt Brecht, the German dramatist and theater man, the man who was more than Kurt Weill, really, responsible for the Threepenny Opera, even though in this country it is very chic to think of the Threepenny Opera and all the other things that the two did in collaboration as largely Kurt Weill. Kurt Weill was really just the man who wrote the music for the theater pieces that Bertolt Brecht wrote. And you'll find a lot of the elements of Bertolt Brecht in this particular piece of work, which is to say a very, very interesting moving back and forth between a strict realistic storytelling and then drawing back, as a Greek chorus will, drawing back and making a comment on what you have just seen in the same terms as what you have just seen. If I play any role in our society, my role is that of the Greek chorus. I am not a featured player. I am not a star. I do not raise the dagger and plunge it into the heart of the enemy. I stand in the back, and once in a while, after the dagger has been raised and plunged, I sing the long dirge. Oh woe, oh mighty, mighty woe. O time and man, O revenge, thou art sweet. And O revenge, thou shalt destroy all of us. And then the chorus rises, and the lights go up, and again the action takes place. And this is a very necessary function. We have in our society, we have somehow been able to bypass the Greek chorus. The chorus which both explains the action to the audience and to those who have just created the action. This is what the Greek chorus always did. And it provided an interesting frame to what was going on. And not only an interesting frame, but it provided a focal point to it. And you'll see this in action if you see Rosemary. It's a beautiful piece of movie making. And from time to time, the three members of the Greek chorus will stroll through the street and will play upon their accordion and will sing. We'll sing, oh, we have all of it now. We have money, we have love, don't we? And then they just stop. We have love, don't we? It's a thing that of course we have our Greek chorus, but most of our Greek choruses today are totally, let's say, unconscious that they are. The other day I'm listening to the radio, and I like to tune across. I have this little radio, and I listen back and forth because you are hearing all the fears, all the strange dreams and fantasies, and all the odd idiosyncrasies and biases of our time are all poured into one thing, and one giant shouting voice. And there's one radio station, and I will use our call letters here because I do not wish to, bring in anybody else. But there's one radio station that said something to me the other day that made my radio shed a tear. It's the first time I've seen plastic weep. It was a very interesting thing. And the guy had just played a record called Teen Angel. Teen Angel, Teen Angel. And then it's one of those radio stations, that spends all of its time playing these teenage fantasy records, and which are kind of borderline pornography. And after every record, they shout loudly about the time and the temperature, as though the time... Somebody pointed out to me that after you listen to one of those radio stations for enough time, and you're walking around and you're living in it always seems to be the same time of day. It always seems to be, it's now 4:21 and a half. It's always the same time. And it's always the same temperature, and it's as though the time and the temperature were products of a show, that the time is now being produced. And so, who handles time? Is that an MCA package, or does William Morris? I imagine William Morris. They got a big stable. I imagine they handle time. I figure MCA handles weather. They do all the. And in the middle of all of this guy gives the station break, and he says, WOR. And now it's time once again for WOR News and WOR Time and WOR News and WOR Time. And now here's a WOR hit tune. WOR loves you. And that's an exact transcript of a station break I heard, and my radio suddenly shuddered a little bit in this great tear because it was the first time that anyone had really told my radio that it was loved. Because I get pretty mad at it sometimes, and I often, you know how people are today. I mean, we forget the little things. I haven't brought it new batteries or anything in a long time. And it was just a wonderful thing to see. And I could see this little old lady up in Queens somewhere who hasn't gotten a letter from her son now in 23 years. She hasn't heard from anybody in 23 years. Once in a while she hears from Pegeen, but that's about all. And for 23 years, and she's up there, and her radio one day tells her that she is loved. And can't you just see those china blue eyes puddling up over that lace collar? And this wonderful sense of having finally arrived. It's as though we're always clinging, toe-hold and foothold, and we can see that big rock overhanging way up there. It's like when I'm this kid and I'm walking through, of course, hot summer evenings, and walking through a tabernacle. You know what is it, a tabernacle when you're a kid? This is different from being a tabernacle when you're an adult. A tabernacle when you're a kid is full of all kinds of lightning and thunder and smells of sawdust and sweaty bodies and hot summer evenings with eyes just outside of that corrugated tin house where the tabernacles used to be always played out. It's that old Greek problem of tragedy, unrequited love, and the final revenge of it all. And I can hear that voice looking down. Voices did, you know, in those days. They didn't speak to you. They looked at you. They raged and ranted about you. They looked up at you and looked down at you. And I can remember the voice of this reformed barber who had become a tabernacle preacher in our hometown, looking down at all of us, every one of us. The time has come for you to look within your hearts and say... And it rose and rose. And by George, that summer heat in great shimmering waves continued to reach up to those long flying clouds. Speaking of clouds and the edges of dreams.
To be crisp, the beer must be icily light. With true lager flavor, precisely right. Lively golden, crystally clear, crisp, refresher. Valentine beer.
Magnificent example of folk musicianship. Speaking of the folk, somebody, a couple of days ago, we were talking about the idea. Of course, the business of this guy swinging in the Fountain de Trevi. I was very interested when I'm standing back in a doorway overlooking the Fontana de Trevi, which is a very beautiful, considered generally the most beautiful of the fountains in Rome. Of course, it depends on what your concept of beauty is, but it certainly is a very impressive thing. You probably saw it in the Katharine Hepburn movies, all the romantic things that are done about Rome all the time. So I'm standing back in a doorway, looking out at the Fontana de Trevi, the Fountain of Trevi, and watching the people there. And there was an old Italian, a guy who was in probably his 80s, and he had a big round face, and he must have had 5 chins. And he was sitting there on the top rung of the metal fence that surrounds the basin of the fountain, and he had a big watch chain across his vest. And he was huge. He must have weighed about 300 pounds. And he's sitting there, and he has a cane, and he has a twinkle in his eye, and he's an absolutely white set of handlebar mustaches. And I'm watching this guy. He's sitting there, and I begin to realize after about 10 minutes of watching him carefully, because I knew that this was too well composed, that what he was doing, he was assuring himself of immortality. He was appearing in every second photograph that was being taken by the 50,000 people who went through. He didn't charge. He just wanted to be in the picture. It wasn't a matter of charge. He just sat there and looked picturesque, which was his only talent in life, obviously. He looked picturesque, and he knew it. And he was all part of showbiz, and I can see this guy morning putting on his makeup and his costume and getting his mustaches curled and waxed, and he's coming down to sit before the Fontana di Trevi to ensure his immortality. That he knows, of course, the millions of people that are taking photographs of this thing all the time, that at least one out of every two are going to say, now what I want to do is take a shot. Now, shh, don't disturb him, because it's very difficult to take pictures, you know. I don't want these people to notice. I just like to have him outlined. You see the right foreground there with the fountain behind, the sun coming out. It's wonderful. It's just wonderful, that old man there. This old clown sat on the top of that fence. I watched him for over 4 hours. And once in a while, he would turn just a little bit so that he would get good lighting on his face. See, the sun was changing all the time. And he would turn and move just a little bit, and he would change his cane, and he would drape his coat just a little. And all the while, this entire performance was surrounded and sort of inundated by an obligato, the great rushing sound of millions of shutters being clicked, and billions of feet of film running through film spools. And other guys, of course, scratch their initials in wet concrete. Others write novels. Other guys go to the tabernacle, and everybody takes his own tack. They're all trying in some way or another. And speaking of the business of writing your names on things, I was at the Victor Emmanuel Monument, which is a tremendous thing growing up out of the heart of Rome. It's called the wedding cake. Of course, everyone knows about it, so I won't even go into it. But it's a monstrosity of overdone imagination, overblown imagination. Gigantic bronze horses and women playing quoits with victory wreaths. The whole business, all this huge thing going on there. And I worked my way all the way up to the top of it, so you can look down over the whole city of Rome. And these tremendous Roman columns are stretching up over your head, maybe 9 stories, huge things. And all of them are completely covered with the names of people who have been here, all those names written in there. Millions and millions of little names. Everybody's trying to make sure that that's right. Everybody's trying to make sure that when this piece of crockery is dug up in the year 2428, their name will be on it. And you know, the interesting thing to report is that when they did dig up some of the Roman ruins of the Forum and several of the victory, or at least the arches in Rome, in the Forum area, they did find names of Roman proletariat scrawled on them. And that's kind of comforting to know that some little clown, some little guy, some little forerunner to a guy who runs a shoe repair shop on the outskirts of Rome left his imprint on the great, vast, ruined Forum of history. And I'm sure that each one of us, when we throw our quarter into that slot, would automatically set it for the fastest ball a machine could throw, knowing full well, of course, that in the end, that we're lucky if we can hit that slow lobbing in curve, even for a fairly decent foul ball. And so you look up at that old sky. It's like the other day when I was talking about the rubber stamps. You know, there is something majestic about a climate in which the rubber stamp can flourish as greatly as it does flourish. And I just received a letter from a guy, and he's written my name in big black print on a piece of paper, and over it with a rubber stamp, over the name Gene Shepard, where the rubber stamp is the simple word and the fantastically complex word Fulfilled. Wouldn't you love to have a rubber stamp that says fulfilled? And this is all part of what we're doing with our language today. There was a time in industrial organizations when you finished an order and you had to stamp it, you'd stamp done, or you'd stamp completed, or you'd stamp on it checked out, April 7th, 1962, check. But today, the words have become other things. And an organization doesn't do its duty, it fulfills. And the man who sent this to me put at the bottom of it, he put a little note. He says, I secured this rubber stamp, and this is a true story. I secured this rubber stamp through a big corporation's purchasing department. Gene Shepard fulfilled. And then you begin to understand when you put that old quarter in that slot there. Oh, boy, I'm going to level. It's going to be a high, hard one. It's like the other night, I get a call from Marty Geisler, who runs the paper book gallery, and this is a very secret thing. We're just going to have to put it on the air now. Marty is a man of peculiar propensities. He's the guy who put the penguin in the doorway to the paper book gallery here a couple of months ago, and he is also the creator of the whole concept of the paper book gallery. And if you are making the village scene this coming weekend, I would certainly highly recommend a visit to the gallery. And a village scene or not, I mean, if you're a person who is looking for, as I'm always looking for, new things to buy, I think that the purchasing a book today is a new kind of placebo. I really do. I think that the buying of a paper book is tied up with our conscience. It's tied up with our feeling of inadequacy. I just wonder how many paper books are actually read that are bought. You're kind of paying obeisance to something, some unknown, some great god. It's some unknown, unseen god of culture when you buy them. Did you see that great cartoon by Didini? I believe it was Didini. In the New Yorker of the past week, once in a while they have a cartoon that really has meaning. And it shows a couple of natives, just plain ordinary natives with blowguns. And standing next to the native is a gigantic stone idol, a tremendous stone idol. This idol must be about 40 feet high, and it's got this just omnipotent stone face. Its eyes are half closed, and it's staring off in the distance, this gigantic idol. And this little guy who's about as high as the instep of this idol is standing there, and he shot a dart at it, like that. And the dart, of course, is bounced off of the stone, and another native is saying to another one in the background, this is a senseless revolt against authority. Oh, time, oh, place, oh, considered thought, oh, spin indeed on. I think I'm going to try the medium fastball this time. Just give me a quarter and I'm ready for business. I'll be back in 15 minutes.
This is WOR Radio, your station for news.
It's okay. Don't push me. I can't. There are times when I just can't face reality, and time is one of those things. I mean, one of the realities. Of course, this is an abstraction. It reminds me, if I might digress here momentarily, it reminds me of this thing that I saw at a party about 6 or 7 or maybe 8 weeks ago. I'm at this party. I'd say maybe about 7 or 8 times a year, most of us have to face the way it really is. Now, generally speaking, I would say that we are usually in a position to turn our backs on the way it really is and casually walk off down the street humming an inconsequential hum to ourselves and considering the weather. I mean, it's a thing. We can do this. But then there are other times when the reality of a thing is brought right down in front of us. It's like your batting average. There it is. I figure that one day when I arrive before the vast eternal bar of justice, and this vast eternal judge of them all is sitting up there at his great big desk looking down and looking over my record, I'm going to stand there and I'm going to say, before you do anything, Your Honor, about my case, I'd like to point out I've got a bad knee. I mean, And so I'm at this party, and it's a party. And today, parties are homogeneous things. The beats and the hips mingle equally with the squares and the uptowners. And I'm kind of representing, I'm just there. I'm representing my constituency, which is me. Well, I'm middle of this party, and this friend of mine comes up to me, and we're sitting there talking a little bit, just generally mingling around, and suddenly he says, look at that couple over there that just came in. And two of the most beautiful bronzed people you ever saw in your life came in. I mean, you know the kind of guy, the tall, thin guy who wears the stuff in the male magazines? And he has this little Tyrolean hat, and his face is sort of bronzed, and he's got sort of vaguely golden curly hair, and the chick he's with is about 5'10", thin, willowy girl wearing toreador pants, and, of course, the orange complexion, this beautiful, smiling, brilliant, crisp people type things. And they both came in, and they really looked, I mean, they were right out of all the better homes and the modern world type things. And they walked into the room there, and all the rest of us inadequately struggling away. The beats are not quite making it as beats, and the squares are not quite square enough. And everyone's going, and the radio is playing, and the record player is playing, and the TV set is yapping away over in the corner there, and the ice cubes are rattling, and you can hear the sound of ginger ale being, and the whole business is going on. It's one of these parties, and it's hot and sweaty, and there's always somebody has turned the radio to one of those little slum radio stations, way down at the bottom of the dial, where guys are talking real fast and they're playing this incomprehensible music all the time, and three or four of them are kind of sinuously dancing in the crowd. And it's a real party. And the guy says to me, wow, look at sociables. And they were true sociables. The real sociables, you know, the kind you see standing next to a barbecue in the backyard in the ads, and he's got his sweater tied around his neck by the arms. He's just finished a game of tennis, and she's just finished some other kind of game, is getting ready to start another kind of game. You can tell, and they're both standing there holding the soft drink bottle in their hands. And these two came into the party. It was a beautiful picture, really. When you see what mankind can really be, you can't help but have faith in mankind. I mean, really. And these two people were kind of a forerunner of the new man. You know, the new man with the wraparound vision and the whole business, all automatic, completely automatic. The new man is going to be completely automatic. Automatic steering, automatic power drive. The whole business is going to be automatic and all transistorized. No old-fashioned tubes. Have trouble with muse and bad bias voltage. I mean, you know, the biases are killing man anyway. And you're not going to have any of that trouble with the new man. And these two were forerunners of the new race of man, which you can see in all the ads, you know. They're there. And so they came in, and this guy nudged me in the elbow. And he's a short guy with thick glasses, by the way. A terrible situation developed later about this. He was standing later on in the party. I'm describing a 20th century party for you. It was right out of Kafka. Later on, this poor little guy was standing over by the punch bowl when suddenly a TV announcer in the crowd hit him in the face because he figured he had insulted him. And of course, TV announcers, being what they are, figure that the world is about to insult them all the time anyway. It's like, you know, if I were to walk up to your door, let's think about this for a minute. If I were to walk up to your door and I were to knock, that's an insistent knock. Did you hear about this landlady that wouldn't answer the knock? Did you read that in the paper? The rent commission sent all the cops and everything down after this landlady, and they knocked. This is just in the paper yesterday, in the Times. They knocked on her door for 4 hours in shifts. These guys are knocking on her door. They knew she was in there. So she finally came out, and they dragged her off to the pokey with about 422 rent violations. And then her doctor appears in the court and says, well, of course, she has what we call regressive anxiety and nervousness. And then the judge says, well, what do you mean? What is this regressive anxiety and nervousness? He says, well, if people were knocking on your door for 4 hours, you'd be nervous too. And the judge picked the book and threw it at both of them. I mean, you know, it's a great world to live in. I mean, when this happens. By the way, she was a kindly gray-haired woman who looked exactly like a Norman Rockwell painting, with a thing underneath it that says, my mother. And so this is all part of it. And I'm standing in the middle of this party, and this guy nudges me, and he says, look, He says, look, a couple of sociables. And I looked up, and by George, he was right. There were two sociables. And the sociables were standing over there by the TV set, and they have a certain way of posing. The new modern man somehow always looks good, no matter what light you see him in. You know this. Whether he's worrying about something, you see him in the ads for TV Guide, you know. When he's worrying about whether to make the big decision, what radio station to use, he looks good no matter what he does. He's a work of art, man is. There's no question about it. I mean, he's better than the Sphinx and everything. And so these two sociables were socializing over there, and the party goes on, and I saw them from time to time. I could see the flash of a well-turned ankle, and once in a while the glitter of a beautiful pair of scrubbed teeth, and they were over there, and they were socializing. And the evening wore on, as evenings and parties wear on. And maybe 2 or 3 hours went by, and the smoke is getting, and my eyes are hurting, and I'm trying to figure out how I can make my getaway. And you know, this whole thing of the party is getting hot and steamy, and the radio is still tuned down there at the end of the slum. And then this girl came in. There's a funny bit there with the girl. She came in, and she walked right up to me, and she says, "You're Gene Shepard, aren't you?" And I says, "That is correct." And with that, she fell flat on the floor in front of me, dead to the world. Plump. I said, "Oh." And I said to the guy next to me, "What do we do, pick her up?" And she says, "No." She looked up from the floor. She says, "No, I'm perfectly able to get up myself." With that, she got up and weaved off into the crowd. This brilliant moment. And so I'm standing there in the middle of the party, and the sociables are there. You know, they're kind of a catalyst in this great sea of halogens that we are part. When suddenly there's a little excitement over in the corner. You know that there's a wave of excitement goes through the crowd that you know something has happened. Something not good, like someone has dropped a bottle out of the window, or some terrible thing has happened. The cop has come in or something like that. Well, I could see this crowd over there by the TV set. And I went over there, naturally, and I looked in through the crowd, and here, sitting right on her haunches, right flat out on her duff, is this chick in the Toreador pants, with the little black vest with the big silver buttons on it and the cashmere sweater. And she is weeping, and somebody is down there pouring water on her head, and 3 guys are holding this male type that she's with away from her, and he's like that, and his white teeth are gleaming in the darkness, and his orange complexion right out of the ads is now purple, and you could see Pepsi-Cola all over his feet, and he's like that. And I said, "What happened?" And somebody says he hit her in the mouth. And the only thing I could figure is that he got too sociable. And I thought, you know, boy, yes, sir. And I walked away into the crowd, and I could hear the uproar going on. And the next thing that happened, of course, was my friend got it in the face from the TV announcer. And 10 minutes later, I'm on the subway going uptown. Boy, I mean, you know, it's good to be. I tell you, it's kind of like holding an ice cube in your hand, and the old ice cube is melting away there, and in a sense, you begin to feel that the ice cube isn't even cold if you hold it long enough, and you forget it's cold. And once in a while, you can get into the shower and you turn on the hot water, and the hot water pours out and sears your skin, and you say, "Wow, is this cold?" It's all part and very closely related, you see, to the same reactions. The time I'm walking through Fountain Square in Cincinnati. Now, all of this might seem to you to be a melange of nothingness, but it isn't really a melange of nothingness. Not at all, because it is a melange of our life, the existence we live. And if you're going to be fulfilled, you've got to live your existence out. You've got to play out the string. It's just a natural course of events. And I'm walking through Fountain Square in Cincinnati one time, and this is a Midwestern city of some renown, and I'm walking through this Midwestern square, and suddenly I see another crowd, great big crowd, and I look up where the crowd is looking, and there's a guy hanging on the outside of a 15-story building. And he's running up and down the side, actually the side of the bricks, right on the side of the building. And everybody says he's going to commit suicide. He's going to commit suicide. And I said, "Oh, no." And everyone has this look of horror on their face. And there's a man 12 stories up, running up and down the side of the building. He's wearing a white T-shirt and a pair of black pants, and you know, just running up and down the side of the building. It was an amazing exhibition. And I says, no. And someone says, yes, he's going to commit suicide. And the police arrived, and they had nets. And the fire department arrived, and they put up ladders. And the guy is being chased from window to window by the cops who are looking out of the windows. And he's running around on the outside of the building, clinging to the bricks. And the crowd is saying he's going to commit suicide. Oh, no. And the sun is shining down, and it's a brilliant summer afternoon. And here I am caught in the swirling vortex of life itself again. Man attempting a senseless revolt against that great stone face of authority. And he's running up and down the side of the building. And suddenly the guy runs around the building, and he's clinging to a drain pipe or something. He's going shinnying up and down. And the next thing that happens, he goes right up to the side of what looked like a great big fire escape, and he unrolls a big sign that came out of his pants or something, a big sign that unrolled, and it said, the circus opens today at 3. Get your tickets at the box office. And everybody stood there, and I could feel the anger rising up in the crowd. He was the Cincinnati Human Fly. And I could feel the anger rising up in the crowd, and I couldn't figure out whether the anger was because they couldn't go to the circus that afternoon, or because the guy really didn't commit suicide and knew where he was all the time. And of course they hauled him off to the pokey for disturbing the peace. Actually, he gave Cincinnati the biggest show that it had since Taft lost the nomination, and that was a big show in itself. And so I walked out, and I felt vaguely disappointed. And the Cincinnati Human Fly has remained with me throughout all these years. I can still see that man clinging to the edge of a building and people saying he's going to do it. He is going to do it for all of us. It's like that little old lady. Did you read this thing that came out of the United Press? Beautiful little... Speaking of little old ladies, we have WOR AM and FM with us here in New York. And we'll be here until, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Time is only of a measuring. Anyway, you can't, if you put the quarter in, maybe if you did hit that slow ball and belted it out into the upper deck, it isn't the same thing as belting that fast inside hooker, that screwball that nobody can... You can reach, and then you can't reach. Is he going to do it, or isn't he?
Bridge players out there in Queens do it. Golfers on New Jersey greens do it. They all enjoy Rheingold beer. New England yachtsmen in style do it. Picnickers on Staten Isle do it. They all enjoy Rheingold beer.
No other beer is like Rheingold. It's refreshingly dry.
New York's favorite beer.
Clean, clear, refreshing.
And the bright taste tells why more millions that end of day do it.
Even rival brewers, well, they may do it.
So do it. Enjoy Rheingold beer.
Rheingold is New York's largest selling beer.
Oh boy, it's who was it who said it? It was James Joyce one time said that, or somebody. If it wasn't James Joyce, it was me who said it. I know that I've said it. Everybody else has probably said it in one way or another at one time or another, but there is within all of us, each one of us, I mean the kids, I mean the people, I mean the grown-ups and the non-grown-ups, there is within us a little dark lump of something that is the unutterable or the inutterable. It's the thing which we all know or suspect, but can't say. And I'm sitting here, and it's kind of almost summer, really. I can see that sun coming down over the river, that old Devil River out there. Once in a while, one of those big ocean liners moves out to sea, and I can feel the vibration in the air. And in a few months, few weeks really, people lounging out there at Jones Beach, and the sun is going to be hitting down at that angle, and the sound of the hot dogs being fried on the hot plate. going to echo throughout the land. And it's a sense of incipient excitement. And yet, deep down within us is this thing that cannot be uttered, this unutterable thing. It's like this beautiful little news note. Again, it's an attempt to recapture something that none of us can ever quite put into words, can ever quite understand, can ever quite feel. What was it? A couple of hours ago, Jim, wasn't it? Yeah. I'm sitting here and I'm ready to go on the air. And I say to Jim, who's the engineer on with us this morning, I says, Jim, you know, it's like you have just gotten your amateur radio operator's ticket this morning, and you're tuning up this Tri-Tet 2A5 push-pull oscillator on 40 meters CW, and you are about to try to make your first contact legally. And that excitement of beginning something, is the excitement that many people carry throughout their entire lives, people like Bertrand Russell and a few others. That feeling of always looking at everything as if it is a completely new thing, and you can't phony it up. I've known guys who have tried to do it, but you can't. Once you've rounded that bend, once you have begun to accept your own life casually, as a matter of course, there just is no going back. You cannot bring back that old excitement. And I guess that's why many of the more jaded people spend most of their time going to the theater. It seems to me that the more jaded a person is, the more interested he is in attending the theater. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about people who create theater. That's another thing. But the great theater addicts are almost always people who are jaded with their own lives. This is also true of a person who incessantly reads. This is also a problem because they're not living anything of their own. And whatever it is that they are living, they're not finding any excitement in it. And so they have to go to the lives of other people to vicariously let Kim Stanley do it for us. To vicariously let Jason Robards feel the great excitement that I'm no longer able or capable of feeling, or perhaps never was capable of feeling them. And then, in the end, you wonder whether or not anybody really is, except in their imagination, capable of feeling the great emotions that are portrayed on the stages and in the novels. Because these novels, you know, are works of the imagination. The people who portray them on the stage are working with their imagination. And so in the end, you get the feeling sometimes that somebody is playing the harmonica for somebody else. And they're both trying to pretend that the music is great and awe-inspiring, and yet it has no basis in the music that's inside of every one. So you're trying to say it. It's like my grandmother. I remember I had this grandmother who was a professional grandmother. There are some people who kind of slip into grandmotherdom and never really are. They're mothers. They're never really grandmothers. But then there are grandmothers who at the age of 22 are grandmothers. And this, it's impossible to really think of a real grandmother as ever being 22. But I had this grandmother who was a true grandmother. And I remember my grandmother one time taking me to the dime store. And I used to love to go to dime stores. Saturday afternoon and dime stores were synonymous in my youth. And I remember going to the dime store with my grandmother. And going to the dime store on this particular Saturday afternoon in the springtime was for my grandmother to buy a new pair of glasses. She bought her glasses in the dime store. Do they still sell glasses in the dime store? They really sold glasses in the dime store. And there was a whole collection of glasses. And I mean eyeglasses. I don't mean sunglasses. I mean glasses. The kind of glasses that elderly people put on when they read. And the kind of glasses that tall, thin men wear when they're working in the library. The rim, and there was grandmother looking down at this collection of glasses. And she's putting them on her nose and reading the Sears Roebuck catalog or something when she did it to see whether or not they worked. And I'm standing there, and grandmother has a pair of glasses with black rims. The very thin kind of round black rimmed glasses with the little gold earpieces and the gold thing that goes over the nose, and it had white tape at all junctures. And there was a big chip out of one glass, and these were the glasses she was throwing away, which she had purchased in this same dime store maybe 5 years before. And she's saying to the woman behind the counter, "Do you have any model 3ABs here? This is what my glasses are. They're model 3AB here." And that was the ones that she was getting ready to... And the woman behind the counter says, we don't carry that model any longer. Which meant, of course, that my grandmother's eye ailment was now out of style, whatever it was that she had. And my grandmother always kept in line with the latest styles as far as a grandmother could on a limited budget. She was like everybody else. I would like to just once get a job or do a show at one place once where the first thing that the producer says to me is, "Look, the first thing I want to tell you, son, don't worry about the money or the budget. It's unlimited." Every job I've ever had, the first thing they say to me is, "Well, of course, you got no dough." There must be some place where they've got all the dough. And how do you get into that? Every time I write an article for a magazine, the first thing they say to me is, "Of course, you realize that we don't have any money, but we have artistic standards." And I want to get to the place where they have the opposite. A lot of dough, no artistic standards. Then I can get away with murder. M-E-R-D-E-R. Murder. Depends on whether you speak French or not. And so I'm working my way through this dime store with my grandmother, you know, and she she says to the woman, "Well, what are the newest styles?" And this woman gave her a pair of glasses, and my grandmother put them on, and I could see her eyes are kind of boggling behind them. And the woman says to my grandmother, she says, "Well, of course, this year most people are nearsighted." And my grandmother says, oh, I see. And I'm standing there, a little kid. I'm hanging on the edge of the counter looking at these glasses being tried on. And my grandmother says, this is the kind of thing. I imagine I can get used to them. It's like women all getting used to pointy shoes today. And nobody has pointy toes. But they're all getting used to them. I think we're going to grow I was looking at Harper's Bazaar today, and this is one of the most grotesque magazines in the world. Fantastic. It's a great hymn to a non-femininity. There isn't a single feminine thing in the whole magazine. Actually, it's a hymn to ego. Another thing entirely. I mean, I suppose this is femininity, I suppose, in a way, in these magazines. But nevertheless, here's my grandmother trying to get used to nearsighted glasses when she's farsighted, merely because it is now the fashion to be nearsighted. And you could buy glasses for 20 cents or 25 cents, maybe 50 cents, maybe $1 in the $5 to $1 stores of the day. Do they still sell them? Does anybody know? Really? Where you can buy, if you can buy glasses in the dime stores around anymore? And they just try these glasses on, and finally my grandmother says, "I'll take these." She says, "I'll take these." And she put on a pair of glasses, and she says, "I'll take my old ones along." And her old glasses were so old and so worn that they just flopped over and bent in the middle. There was tape holding them together, big white chunks of tape. And she put them in her purse, and she put on her new glasses. And I'm leading my grandmother, and it's like she's always walking up a hill. She kept saying, "Is this awful hilly here, Jeannie?" And she always called me Jeannie, which made me turn green at the edges. And she says, "It's awful hilly here, isn't it?" And I says, "No, those are your new glasses, Grandma." She says, "Yes, I'll get used to these glasses, don't worry." And by George, my grandmother turned from farsighted to nearsighted within 6 months. And I'll never forget the sad thing that happened to her. About 4 or 5 years later, glasses came out in the dime stores that were for the newest current rage, which was tunnel vision. Do any of you know anything about tunnel vision? Grandmother never got used to that. She just never quite made it with the pointy toes. Speaking of pointy toes, we have with us the Paper Book Gallery, and I don't want to run past this too quickly. The Paper Book Gallery is down in the village, and Marty Geisler called. Now, this is the thing which is only for the poor few soreheads who are spending a sunny afternoon ruminating. And obviously that's all you're doing. You are vegetating. I have a friend who was able to grow mushrooms out of his back one time just by thinking hard enough about it, and by kind of a yeasty side to life that you just can't ignore. It proved to be a rather profitable avocation. He had a little trouble with shirt sizes, though. But that's neither here nor there. Marty Geisler has been having trouble with guys coming down into the paper book gallery, looking him right in the eye, and various other clerks of his down there, and looking them right in the eye and saying Excelsior. Now this is, yes. Now do you know what Excelsior means, don't you? We will not go any further. I mean, Excelsior has a really deep hidden meaning in our lives, and certainly in my life. As I lie on those snowy slopes holding the sign up, with the touch of the frozen north upon my brow, and the elderly farmer looking down at me, I don't know what happened there. He died with the words Excelsior on his lips. Well, anyway, Marty has just out of one of those whims, and it has nothing to do with a commercial gimmick, out of one of those whims, has laid in a stock of buttons, which he designed himself, which say nothing but Excelsior, you fathead. and he will make these buttons available free to anyone who comes to one of the two paper book stores, looks his clerk right in the eye, and says in a loud, clear, ringing voice, Excelsior, you fathead. And without a word of demur, the clerk will reach under the counter and hand you a button that says the same thing, which you can flash if things get rough at a party. Excelsior, you fathead. So if you are going down to the paper book gallery, do that. It's a rubber stamp that, in a sense, says fulfilled. I would like to have a rubber stamp. Incidentally, Marty, if you're listening, what button made out that merely says fulfilled on it? I think that's much better. And that will worry all the people who vaguely feel they are not fulfilled if they see a man sporting a button that says he is. And, of course, in the end, this could grow to be it could almost grow to be a tremendous theological movement. Because this is what we're all looking for anyway, in addition to Godot himself. So this is the paper book gallery. They will be open until 2 o'clock this morning down in the village. And with the tiny, tiny tinkling silver bells of spring in the air, the paper book gallery and the whole village is standing on tippy-toe, waiting to welcome the muse of the free soul, moving as a wraith of smoke through the rainbow-hued horizon of existence. It's not bad. Oh, somebody called and says they do sell glasses on the Lower East Side from push carts and in the 5 and dimes in Queens. It is quite true that Queens is roughly 15 years behind, and they're still out. In the 5 and 10 cent stores in Queens, you can still buy a pair of glasses. Now the glasses, I have a feeling I'm going to go into one of these dime stores and I'm going to buy myself a pair of glasses. 10-cent glasses or 20-cent glasses. This is a part of. Did you know that in certain dime stores in the south side of Chicago, when I was a kid, now I know that you're not going to believe this, and this is not a program, I have to say it, devoted to nostalgia. It's a program devoted to trying to hit the fastball thrown by the vast pitching machine of life, knowing full well that even if you do hit it, it's only going to hit a concrete backdrop. And that all you win, if you do win, is a plastic Cupid doll. When I was a kid, Jim, you remember? See if this happened in New York. When I was a kid, on the south side of Chicago, in the dime stores, the $5 to $1 stores in that area. Now, my uncle often bought. Now, I had an uncle named Tom, who was an interesting man. Uncle Tom was the bootlegger in our family, and he wore gray spats. And he had a gigantic dog named King, an enormous German Shepherd dog that was the first man-eater I ever met. And this was Uncle Tom. But Uncle Tom had an odd idiosyncrasy. Uncle Tom, the necessities of life he never spent for. Never. He lived in a stucco house. I don't know is there such a thing anymore today as stucco? Well, he lived in a gray stucco house that had all over this stucco house in Beverly Hills on the south side of Chicago, in the very hip, chic neighborhood where all the bootleggers lived. he had a stucco house that was gray. It was kind of tattletale gray. And it had all kinds of little stickly things on the outside. You know, stucco always had little kind of like little prongs and little pointy things. It was very rough. It was like very thick sandpaper, this stucco house. And it was gray, but it had sprinkled all over the stucco. You see, stucco was kind of like plaster or something. It had broken pieces of red and green and yellow glass, so that in the sunlight, this house was blinding. It was fantastic. That was the kind of house that Uncle Tom lived in. And when I'm a kid, you know, I used to go out there in the sun. I'd stand next to that house, and I'd just look at the glass there. And one day, I'm taking all the green emeralds out of the side of this thing, and Uncle Tom came out and he says, "Stop that." And I said, "Why? Kids, what? I pretend that I'm not doing it, and he knows I'm doing it." He says, "You can't take the jewels off my house." And I thought this was a kind of a good line. I'm thinking for a long time this would be a nice title of a short story. And so Uncle Tom lived in a stucco house. It had jewelry all over the side of it. But Uncle Tom did one thing which I will never, ever forget. Uncle Tom used to buy his false teeth from a guy who sold false teeth by mail, and they also sold false teeth in the dime store. And Uncle Tom had a dime store pair of false teeth that he used for everyday eating. His false teeth that he bought by mail for $9.95, he used for Sundays and for company. Now, there you are. And I remember one day Uncle Tom complaining bitterly that he had to go down to Kresge's to buy a new pair of teeth. And they were made out of plastic, and he used to keep them in a glass. And I can remember waking up at maybe 5, 6, kids wake up early in the morning. Nobody in my family ever wore false teeth. I lived in a non-false teeth family. And I can remember at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm waking up in the stucco house with the jewels all over on the outside of it, and the sun just coming over the stockyards, beginning to hit those green jewels. And I walk into the John there as a kid, and there is a big glass right there looking at me from the mirror, the little shelf under the mirror, a big glass with a pair of teeth smiling at me from the dime store. And I used to look at those teeth, and those teeth would look back at me. And I always had the funny feeling when I left the John after that I was impolite because I didn't say hello or something. So if you're going to the paper book gallery, just say to them today, "Excelsior, you fathead," and stand back and see what happens. Great. If this tall, thin, clerks, I want to say this, clerks in bookstores, in a sense, represent the wrath of God to many of us. That somehow the clerks in the bookstores all seem to not only have assimilated all the knowledge in the bookstore, but somehow were responsible for its creation. And you get in there, and you're afraid to ask them for something. You come in, and here you are surrounded by Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer and Kafka and all the great writers of the past, and you go up to this guy and you say to him, you feel like you're bound, you're really duty-bound to ask him for something by Swift or Nietzsche or Ovid or someone like this. And you walk up to this guy and you say, you have anthologies here? And he says, "Why, yes, we have anthologies, the great short stories of the 18th century Italian Renaissance literary movement. We have a great collection of anthologies of neo-Bacchian romanticists. We have," and you say, "Well, yes, tell you, I heard about this this anthology of the best of Captain Billy's whiz-bang." You're embarrassed to ask, and the guy winks slowly with his left eye and says, "I know what you mean, Jack." And he reaches down under, and by the way, that wouldn't be a bad anthology, would it? The best of Captain Billy's whiz-bang. Some of my more desperate moments when I was a kid was the fear that my mother would discover my cache of spicy detectives. A collection of spicy detectives wrapped in baseball uniforms, fielder's mitts, and catcher's gloves for years. Oh, I'll never forget the time. I'll never forget one of the worst moments that ever happened to me in my life is that I came into the sun porch. We had a sun parlor porch kind of thing, you know, where the ferns were growing and there was a day bed. And my mother said, one day I came home from playing ball or something, and my mother said, I think your father wants to see you. This is a bad thing right away. So he says, oh, okay. And I figured he was going to make me wash the car or clean the fish or some ridiculous thing. And she says, he's in the sun porch. And so I go in the sun porch, and there is my old man sitting in an easy chair reading the latest copy of Spicy Detective, which I had stolen from George's newsstand not more than 3 hours before. It was still warm. And he's sitting there reading it. Oh, boy. And I walk in, and I said, hi, Dad. And he said, hi. And I'm standing there shifting from one foot to the other, and he says to me, you ever do any reading? And I say, yeah, I like to read. He says, well, what do you like to read? And I shift from one foot to the other, and I said, well, Wizard of Oz. I like the Oz, and Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy. He said, did you read the story here about this detective who gets this case in this small town, and there was this blonde who... and my eyes are bulging, and he says, go on back out and play baseball, son. Don't bother me. I'm reading. I skulked past the ice box, out over the back porch, carrying my tape bag, and back out into the vacant lot, and never said a word. And as a matter of fact, I had one of the worst days in the field I've ever had in my life. It was a very bad situation. Speaking of situations, if you're looking for a restaurant that makes it, I would like to highly recommend Yin and Yang. And I think I'm going to go down tonight myself. And in fact, I'll make that a promise. I feel like pampering myself. You know, I get back from Rome and every place, and I'm trying to get back into the swing of things, and it's really not good. You know, it's a difficult thing. One of the worst things about going off into dream world is coming back into the world of the too chewed gum and the smoked cigar butt. You know what I mean? Coming back into reality. It's like when you come back from a trip to Rome or someplace like that, it's exactly like walking out of a movie in the middle of the afternoon. You know that awful feeling of suddenly the sun is not, and even the real things seem unreal. Well, I'm going to pamper myself, and I will definitely be tonight. I'm going down to Yin and Yang, and I better get on the phone and call them and make up a reservation for me. And I'm going to have chicken wings, and I'm just going to sit there. And I'm going to have chicken wings, and I'm just going to sit there and mull it over for a while. Now, here's where Yin and Yang is. It is one of the best restaurants I've ever discovered in this town. And I think you'll find that comes up because I'm continually getting letters from people about it, that it really does make it. It's a restaurant on 3rd Street in the Village. And I might say that it is only 2 doors from one of the paper book gallery stores. There are 2 of them, one on 3rd and the other over on Sheridan Square, where 10th Street hits 7th Avenue South. Now, Yin and Yang is at 82 West 3rd Street. And they're open until about 1 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays, and they're open till, I think, midnight on Sundays. And they open at noon. They have a bar, and they serve some of the most magnificent Chinese food concocted in the United States today. It is really a good restaurant. I'd like to point out this to you. They only have 18 tables. And if you want to get there, it would be if you want to have dinner there, it would be a very wise thing for you to do, to call and make a reservation before you go down. It's Yin and Yang, Y-I-N-G and Y-A-N-G, 82 West 3rd Street in the Village. And they're open all throughout the week. And I think I'll go down there and just pamper myself for a while. Have the guy, you know. But it's like that sad little story. I saw a little story. I don't know whether you saw it. Again, it has to do with that stone idol. It has to do with a little round man standing in the batting cage at Coney Island swinging at fastballs thrown by a machine, Krista Matheson, whipping them past with fantastic blazing steam. There was a little note Listen to this. It came from Upton, Massachusetts. Did you hear this? I wish I had mood music to play behind it. I don't need it because it has its own mood. Every man, believe me, I don't care who he is, every man lives surrounded by whatever dream or nightmare that is his own particular dream or nightmare in this, and no one man can cross another's. No one man can ever quite penetrate another's. And for this reason, and because of this, there have grown great, fantastic mythologies. Get too close to that sun, buddy, and you're just gonna bake those wax wings right off your back. Listen to this. Upton, Massachusetts, today mourned the death of a little old lady who kept the spirit of July 4th alive when the town wanted it to die. Mrs. Emma J. Eames, a widow, died last night in a hospital after a short illness at the age of 4. Mrs. Eames lived alone in a tiny house by the town common in this central Massachusetts community of about 1,200 people. Each year, she would watch the traditional parade or fireworks display when July 4th rolled around. But one year she was disappointed. Upton had decided to dispense with the celebration. Lack of interest, the town select men said. Quote, the young fellas don't like to march, the veterans organizations reported. Mrs. Eames was indignant. She decided to do something about it. So the next year, on July 4th, she arose early in the morning and donned her red, white, and blue polka dot dress. She took down from the attic a little tin horn that she had played when she was a child. And then she left her little house and began to march around the common all by herself, blowing the little tin horn on July 4th in Massachusetts. A policeman happened by and asked her what she was doing. Celebrating the 4th, she replied. He stayed to watch, and so did other passers-by. When she had circled the half-acre common a few more times, she abruptly turned her back on the spectators and without a word went back into her house. She did this for more than 5 years, and each year she attracted a larger crowd. Her march around the common became something of a tradition in the town of Upton, Massachusetts. Last year, Mrs. Eames was named honorary chairman of the town's 225th anniversary observation. A full-scale celebration with fireworks, parade, and a fireman's muster was planned to cover July 2nd through July 4th. But all she said to it was this: I'll still get out my little horn and celebrate in my own way. People today don't really know how to celebrate anymore. The greatest words I have heard in this century. People today do not know how to celebrate anymore. Mrs. Eames, by George, you said it for all of us. People today don't know how to celebrate anymore.
Gene Shepard.
From April 16, 1960, Gene has been locked out of his office at war. Angry cab drivers, a world filled with agents, Aunt Theresa's Jell-O molds, Aunt Theresa and Uncle Fred. There are elements of Ahab in each of us.
listen, I want you to very, very carefully follow every word that I am about to utter. And this is serious. This is probably one of the most serious things that's ever happened to this country. And I believe that I am the first man in the eastern section of this United States to have discovered it. It's a terrible plot, an awful thing that's beginning to happen. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened. I come down to the station this morning. Now, the station is a standard, ordinary sort of building. I mean, it's an office building, you know. There are all kinds of accountants, second-rate dentists, guys who do tax returns. There are Christmas tree salesmen, all sorts of ordinary businessmen up and down throughout this entire gigantic honeycomb of a building. It's right here on Broadway, right in the middle of Manhattan, right in the middle of these United States. Stable country. Country that believes in right things, has God on its side. I mean, right? Okay, correct. We know exactly where we are. So I came down here this morning. I am an employee here. I'm a hard-working man. I do exactly what I am paid to do. I am here. I do it. I go through my song and dance. I tap dance. I do my routine. I play my nose flute. I pick up my pittance and I go. I don't bother anybody, right? I have not rubbed anyone's fur the wrong way, correct? Okay, all right. Now, we know where we stand. I come down to this place this morning, and I arrive in front of my office, this little hole in the wall that they have assigned to 2 or 3 of us, and I reach in my pocket and take out the key. I have a key, a regular Yale lock key, you know, the official kind of key that opens apartments on the east side and that. And I go up to this door, and I try to put the key in. Nothing happens. I turn it over, and I try it again. Nothing happens. So then I take out my other gigantic pile of keys that are all attached to this long chain that keep falling out of my pocket and breaking at the horn and hard art and all that. So one by one, I try each one, knowing full well that none of these are the keys to this door. But a man can't believe such a thing can happen. This is Saturday morning. The sun is shining. There are tourists walking up and down as though nothing is happening right there on Times Square. So, now listen carefully. This has to do with you, not me, you, all of us. And so I'm beginning to work around with this lock, and I suddenly, it dawns on me, I can't get in the office. I'm locked out. I call the air conditioning, the guys who maintain none of them can get in. The doors are all locked, and none of their keys work. This is on Saturday morning in this country, America. I can't get in the office. Everything, all the things I own, all the important things are locked in that office now. My nose flute, my commercials, what else is there in my life? So I come up to the studio here, and all these people here are totally unconcerned, not knowing what is occurring. Now, I'd like to point out just exactly what this means. I have a suspicion that this has happened. It's an awful thought. But do you realize this town is vulnerable? We are wide open on Saturday mornings. All you poor clowns are sitting out in Darien. You poor idiots are sitting on your duffs out there in New Rochelle, not knowing nothing about what's going on in your office on a Saturday morning. And I'm inquiring around here, and I asked the elevator operator, I said, what, was there anybody up here? He says, why, yes, a short, stout man wearing a dark overcoat with a velvet collar appeared, carrying a thin briefcase and a large ring of keys. He left, he said, within 10 minutes. It could very well be possible that this man, this short, stout man, is only one of a large phalanx of short, stout men bearing briefcases who have appeared all over Manhattan. Do you realize what this could do to this country if Monday morning 2.5 million men descend upon Manhattan with the wrong keys? What is the first assumption you make when your key doesn't work in the lock? Of course, you know what the first thing that you think of in this town. You arrive at your office, you try the key, you immediately get in the elevator, go down, and head for the unemployment office. That's all there is to do. Either that or you go right back home on the 1037 and you arrive back in Darien. You go home and you say, I left my keys. Where are my keys? I could see this beautiful scene of the guy arriving home. He says, hey, Mabel, I left my keys, for crying out loud. It's about 11 o'clock now. And his wife says, what do you mean you left your keys? There are no keys here. I must have taken the wrong keys, Mabel. Come on, now, give me them keys. Hurry up. I left them on the buffet, for crying out loud. Hurry up. And she goes in and rustles through the buffet. She says, "There's a couple of keys to the garage here." He said, "Well, no, come on, the keys. Give me the keys, quick. These keys don't work." "These are the only keys you've had, Charles." And then the panic begins to hit Charlie. He sits down and says, "Why didn't they have the guts to tell me? Why didn't they tell me? Why didn't they tell you? Look, I have a suspicion. What with the abstract life that we're all involved in, the paper life, the life of deep, abject fear that most of us live in, and it's a fear, it's not a fear really of bombs. It's not a fear of the decline of Western civilization. Let me tell you, in spite of what the writers write about, it is not a fear of the great threat of rising imperialism in the East. None of these things bother the average guy. Oh, no. It's the terrible sneaking suspicion that one day they're going to discover what a phonus balonus he really is, and not even with so much as to dignify it. With a pink slip, blue slip, or green slip, they merely just changed the lock. That's all there is to it, and he'll know exactly why they did it. And I fully believe that this country could be invaded, could be disrupted, completely destroyed. For 3 whole days, no one would even find it out, because no one would have the guts to say anything to the next guy. They locked me out of the office. The only thing that would happen would be by Wednesday there would be 17.5 million guys lined up in front of the unemployment office on 42nd Street, all of them pretending that, carrying on with the big front, until somebody by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon would discover that the unemployment guys have been locked out, and they are in the line too. And by then, of course, someone would appear on the radio and say, "It's all over. It is all over. We have the keys now." And to the right thinkers in the audience, to the right thinkers in this big country of ours, this wonderful country which is now ours, to the right thinkers will go the right keys. Apply. Signed, the Commissar. So I believe that George Orwell was wrong. Seriously, it's not going to be the way Orwell said it was. It's not going to even be the way Huxley said it was. Oh, this could be happening right now. You better call your office this very minute. You had better call your office this very minute, because I am locked out. I have no commercials. I have nothing. I stand before you, a man not only shorn of his commercials and his nose flute, but shorn of his dignity too. And all I can say is to my fellow Americans, for crying out loud, why didn't we think of this? Well, I guess in a way we had it coming to us. I mean, in a sense, we did. We abdicated all along the line, each one of us. I mean, I'll admit, I never realized the value. Yeah, I can just see. Do you realize that I'm locked out of the men's room? Huh. You know what this can result in. I don't have to go any further with that. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people just wait and see Monday. Don't be out there laughing. Don't laugh at all. Because the time is going to come, say about 3 o'clock Monday afternoon, you're going to remember where you heard it first. Not on Winchell's program or on Barry Gray. Edward R. Murrow didn't even note that it was happening. So concerned was he over the Middle Eastern crisis. Right here in our very midst. Well, I think we had it coming. I mean, I'm walking. I mean, the signs are there. The signs are there, really. They've been all around us for centuries. This morning, I'm walking along, and I'm on 7th Avenue, and I'm about maybe at 52nd, 53rd Street, something like that, on 7th Avenue. And there is a typical American family group milling around. They have come in from Millfield, New Jersey, or Milling Pond, Connecticut. And they have arrived, and they are sort of standing on the corner there, and there's a short, stout father type, a real father. This guy was born with a salt and pepper mustache. His mother had a difficult time. He was born with a salt and pepper mustache. He's standing there, and he's kind of milling. He's pear-shaped, and his wife is a sort of pear-shaped wife. And they're milling, and they had this look on the face of, well, where shall we go now? What are we going to do? We are in the big city now. This is what we've come for. Now where to? Will it be the Roxy to see the Rockettes? Shall we go down to Rockefeller Center and just watch the flags flop? Or shall we, this thing? Well, here we are. Now what? And they're standing around, and mother's looking west, and he's looking east, and there are two gawky, gangling kids of the modern progressive school-type kids. You know, you can always tell the way the girl brushes her hair and the kind of blazer that the kid wears. They're much better dressed than the parents. All the dough has been invested in these two striplings. And the two of them were standing there. and I heard this. I'm going to tell you exactly what I heard. Father has said, obviously, what he wants to do. Mother has countermanded what he wants to do. She has something else. They're both standing there. And this tall, brushed girl, who already, at the age of 13, has a little set of letters above her head that say betrothed. You know, you can just see her looking right out of the Herald Trib Society page. And she says to Mother and Father with a commanding voice, that's the sad part of it, she says, let's have a discussion. Let's have a discussion. This is a democratic discussion. You see, this is the ideal of all the Spocks, all the parent magazines, 17, Zip, Pip, Quick, all the rest of them, that whenever things are going wrong, have a discussion. Rely on the judgment of these idiotic 13-year-olders. And in the end, give in to them, you see, through a long series of illogical arguments. And so I'm walking there, and this chick, this 13-year-older, says, let's have a discussion. And poor Father, I could see he just sort of wilted a little bit, and Mother wilted a little bit, and I knew what the discussion was going to result in. And it's no wonder we've lost our keys. It is no wonder we have lost the combination to the lock. and I go, you know, about 10 minutes before that, I'm walking past Carnegie Hall. And here is a real Schraft lady standing out. This is, by the way, the gathering place for Schraft ladies on Saturday afternoons and Saturday nights. And they're all standing out there. And there's one wearing, you know, the kind of fur wrap, the little fur wrap that looks like a kind of a brownish fur wrap that kind of goes halfway around the shoulders and hangs down to about the shoulder blades. You know, this little kind of, what do they call those things? These are old lady type. Is that a stole? Well, she's got this thing around her, and she's wearing this little pot turned upside down on her head. You know, a real Schrafty hat. And she's standing there, and this is exactly what happened. I'm going to outline to you why we have lost our keys. We have lost the combination. And I'm walking past her, paying absolutely no attention to this old gal, and she's paying no attention to me, and all of a sudden she's, for heaven's sakes, for pity's sakes. And I turned, you know, I thought she was saying something to me, and she tore out on the sidewalk and kind of went into an Immelman turn, you know, a slow looping turn, made a turn to the right, and there another one who looked exactly like her came darting out of a doorway, and they both clasped each other. She says, Emily, for pity's sakes, I've been waiting for a dog's age. Where have you been? And Emily says, right here in the doorway, Clara. And they were both clinging to each other, and I thought, oh, what a touching scene. And all of a sudden, Emily says, Clara, for crying out loud, let's grab a hot dog and get in line. And the two of them went into Nedick's right there next to Carnegie. Let's grab a hot dog. It's no wonder we've lost our keys. Speaking of the lost, this is WOR, AM and FM, New York. Friendly, reliable, sober, industrious, and vaguely confused.
Now let's beat out a message via Tom-Tom.
Isolate light, isolate light. Precisely right, precisely right. Crisp free pressure. Valentine beer.
To be crisp, a beer must be icily light. With a flavor, precisely right. Lively golden, crystally clear, the crisp refresher. Valentine beer.
Hey, get your cold beer. Hey, get your Valentine beer.
Boy, that moved. That was pretty good, wasn't it? All right, George, we ought to be locked out all our lives. Actually, I think that, you know, it's a funny thing. I'd like to make a point here. Now, don't be too frightened. It is quite possible you are locked out. Now, you have all of Saturday afternoon, you have all of Sunday morning and Sunday evening to contemplate it. Now, there's another side to this thing. It isn't as bad as it seems. In fact, it is much better than it seems. I have a suspicion that the best thing that could happen to 90% of the males in this country would be to be locked out. I mean, I'm serious about that. I mean, I know a whole lot of guys who, if they were relieved of the responsibility of telling the boss what to do with his key, if they were relieved of the responsibility of quitting, they would sneak back home on the 532 with this fantastic sense of relief. And of course, they would be weeping and pretending that it was a terrible thing. And they would arrive home and they would go through all the motions. And then by Tuesday morning, they would awake and they'd notice that sun's shining out there, and they'd hear a few of the birds whistling. And they would not even, it's a surprising thing how many of us go through our lives bound and shackled and held down by enormous chains, which we think, of course, are terribly important and necessary to our existence, which, as in the matter of fact, are really the one agent that is preventing us from existing, from being really true and real, from being what we want to be. And I can see, I would like to know, I'd just like to know how many guys are sitting out there listening to this now. And their wives, of course, think this is a ridiculous thing. What do you mean, Charles would? Why, it would be terrible if Charles was locked out of the agency. I just wonder how many guys have this sneaking thing deep inside of them who are saying, oh, boy, oh, would that be great? Oh, come on, admit it, you know? It would be great. Because a lot of things would happen. First of all, I think one of the things that has begun to worry many people in this country is the constantly advancing effeminization of the male. It's really not as simple as that. That the advancing masculization of the female has, in so creating a new atmosphere, has in a sense removed some of the masculinity from the male. In short, a male is only masculine when compared to a female and her degree of femininity. It's not that the women have lost femaleness, they have lost femininity. It's not that the males have lost maleness, they have lost masculinity. And so, as you look around, you see all the stage shows, almost all of the movies today feature the new stars who have come up since about 1949 or 50 are all vaguely feminine. That is to say, they're not outwardly completely masculine, say in the Spencer Tracy mold of a previous era, you see, total masculine, you know, or in the mold of, say, the Clark Gables, or a mold of the Victor McLaughlins of the past. I mean, this was a complete masculine man, and so gradually there has been a change, a slight coloring of it all, and I could just see this little man whose sole function in life has been to supply an endless stream of dollars for the quote activities of the family. The station wagons that are coming and going, and the kids that are going to this school and that school, the wife who's going to this club and that club, and the whole bit. His sole function has been to supply this endless stream. Funny thing the elevator operator said today, I'm coming in, and he said it right out of the blue. Funny, you know, Saturday mornings, I think, are very valuable times for consulting your navel. Really. Because honestly, a lot of the hoopla and a lot of the paper bag popping and a lot of the paper doll cutting out has ceased, you know, in these places. And you begin to see things for what they are. The file cabinets look gray and deserted and a little menacing and very faceless. They look okay, you know, when there's a lot of girls standing in front of them moving the drawers up and down. But boy, they look something else again when you see them with nobody. They just sit there waiting. And they contain all of our lives, all of ours, right there, packed away in alphabetical order, cross-indexed. And so I come in here, you know, and I'm very quietly standing on the elevator with my cup of lukewarm coffee, and the elevator operator suddenly turns to me and says, I don't know what it's about. I said, what? What? He said, I don't know. I figure some of these guys are going to come in here on Judgment Day. I said, what? What? And then I'm beginning to wait. Judgment Day. I hear the great bugles blowing and the gong, and I wonder how suddenly Judgment Day, and I'm waking out of my lethargy. I said, Judgment Day? What do you mean Judgment Day? He says, well, I'll tell you. He says, you know, there are some guys, I've been riding this elevator now for 20 years, There are some guys who come into this office 7 days a week into this building. They come in at 7 o'clock in the morning. They don't leave until 10 o'clock at night. And they do this they've been doing it now for 20 years. I don't know how long they were doing it before I came here and how long they're going to do it after I leave. They're going to come in on Judgment Day. Wonder what these guys get out of life. And I had no answer. Absolutely no answer. And then I began to think, I get off the elevator and I walk back with my key held hopefully in my hand. And I try it in the door and I'm locked out. And I'm struggling around. There's the first moment of panic and then there's the great moment of relief. And I turn around. I'm walking away from the door. Okay. And it suddenly occurred to me that these guys, that most of these guys who spend their lives going up and down elevators and shuffling papers back and forth are running as hard as they can, just as wildly and as hard as they can from something else. They're not running to something. They're running away from something. And they're running away from this involvement with mankind and with the human being, with the family, with the people. Because you're not involved with people at all when you're involved with file cabinets and papers and deals. That's totally abstract. And I'm going up the stairway then. I try the men's room. I'm locked out. I'm wandering around there, and I'm disenfranchised. And I said, well, maybe the bugles are getting ready to blow. Who knows? And I suspect in some ways that they might be. Like today, I'm walking. These are all things that happened to me today. Exactly, all in one line, just lined right up. I'm walking along. I know. Maybe I passed one block after I heard Emily talking to Clara. And I'm in the next block, and I'm waiting for a light. And a cab pulls up. And I'm suddenly reminded of an incident that occurred to me 4 or 5, maybe 3 or 6 or 9 days ago. Are you a collector of cab companies' names? Don't fall into the idea that all cabs are just cabs. And don't begin to believe that they're all named either Yellow or Checker. They are not. That there are thousands of cabs in this right here in this city that have a little red series of block letters on the back doors that tell the name of the cab company. Now, how this works is that if you're a cab company owner and say you own 100 cabs, well, for tax purposes, what these guys do is split their company up into about 30 different little companies, and each company owns 3 cabs, you see. It's kind of a corporation tax deal, and actually it's one big company, but there are 30 little corporations, and each one has to have a name that has to be put on the outside of the cab. And so they come up with some great names. I'm telling you, some of the greatest names. For example, there is the Money Cab Company. I mean, how's that for a guy getting right down to the basic of it all? I saw this when by George, there's the Money Cab Company. And one day I get in the cab, and it says Friendly Cab Company. And I get in, and there's this little gnarled cab driver sitting up there in the front seat. And he's and this kind of guy who has a constant stream, an untapped stream of obscenity, just running right through him like a fountain, and it bubbles out of his ears and out of his eyes and out of his and there's hate, little lines of hate extending from him, and it's as though he has thorns growing out all over him, and there are little filaments reaching out that have poisonous tentacles on the and I arrive at the end of my trip. I had the guy his tip. Here I've gone, it's getting to the point now. All those little cab driver tricks. For example, giving you your change in all dimes. The reason this is done, of course, so that you can't give 15-cent tips. So if you get a 40-cent cab ride, he'll give you your change in all dimes. You can't give him a dime tip. You wind up giving him a 50% tip, 20 cents for a block. And so he tries this routine, and I reach in my pocket, and I got a nickel. So here we've gone this little way. We've gone about 4 blocks or something like that, and I give him 15 cents, which is a standard tip for this little... He looks at me like that, and he slams the door, and there goes the Friendly Cab Company off in the distance. Then there was another great moment that happened to me. I get in a cab on Madison Avenue the other day, and it's one of those terrible moments when we turn left We get into a crosstown street, and every truck, every bicycle, every motor scooter, 14,000 cabs, 95 policemen, 7 fire trucks, everything is converged on us. We are completely trapped. And I am sitting there, and all I can hear is the sound of muffled curses around me and the tick of the meter. My lifeblood is dripping out of me on the floor. Like that, you see. I'm sitting there for about 40 minutes, it seemed, and the smoke is rising and the steam, and it's hot. You know, it's really hot already there, you know. It's hot. You can see the city. It might as well be in mid-August. Steaming. And finally, it's for crying out loud. And I get out of the cab, and by now I run up a bill of $1. So I give the guy $1.25, and I slam the door, and I look at and there it is, the name on the door, and I'm telling you, this happened to me. Listen to this. The Hopeless Cab Company.
From June 4, 1960, a movie on The Late Show, a panorama of the Civil War, Indiana, a snake chucking, night people, a new kind of sin.
first thing you've got to remember if you're going to play in this game is do not ever, 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 if you can help it, never panic. I mean, what you got to do is to play it close to the vest. And not only that, you got to keep your head around. You just got to keep your head. You got to realize that he who panics, he who begins to feel the water in the knees, he's the first one who goes down when that great blast comes rolling up over that long, long field just outside of town. Now, of course, the problem is one which all of us, it's like the letter I got from this indignant 14-year-old kid. He says, "Shepherd, if it's all so rotten, what's your plan?" Well, I'm presented there with obviously a choice, which, incidentally, man has always liked, as long as it remains in the abstraction. Like last night, I'm watching this ancient movie. It's a movie about men who are trying to break out of a prison camp during World War II. And they're using all kinds of subterfuges. They have all sorts of little games and tricks. It's a beautifully done movie and a very exciting one. For those of you who stayed up to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to watch, I'm a kind of an addict of the late movies. This is the tail end of it all. These are the ones that they never say before they show them. This is a New York premiere. Nothing. It's been on for years. Late movie. I'm also a fan of the late reverends who come on and bless the television station. and all the listening audience and the viewing audience before the flag flies and the NARTB code sign comes up. Somehow, this is a proper end of a 20th century American's day, to have a transcribed minister say something over us on film. And to see those... Have you ever wondered about this? The Star-Spangled Banner comes on, and they're singing about the land of the free and the home of the brave and peace. And all you see on the screen are jet planes flying back and forth and guys marching and bombs going off. Somehow I feel a little uncomfortable about that when they're doing it. And it usually just follows a 5-minute newscast where somebody has made threatening gestures in our direction. And then the jet planes fly past and more soldiers fly and the flag flies, and then I feel better. Yes, and just before the NARTB sign comes on, the man who is always off camera assures us that one more day in magnificent May is just about to come up, or another day in fantastic January is about to be unfolded before us the next day. So it's always the sense of waiting. Now, to that irate 14-year-older, I don't know. I have been trying to think of an alternate plan. I have considered Tahiti, and I've realized there, of course, there's no dough there, and my agent wouldn't follow me there. I'm perfectly aware of that. On the other hand, son, I say that as far as plans go, it has been my experience, and I might say that I'm one of the most inexperienced of all human beings. And, of course, all human beings are inexperienced when it comes to, let's say, the ultimate sense of experience. After all, I mean, we are only on one small corner of that gigantic battlefield. I remember one time I saw how long has it been since you've seen a panoramic painting? Well, a panoramic painting, in case any of you are interested, is an early version of, well, it was before they had movies and people still wanted to see everything happening at once. They wanted to have a sense of development, they wanted to have a sense of drama, and they wanted to have a sense of marching of time and events past a given point. This is what a movie is, actually, see? In the 19th century, the panoramic painting grew to be one of the big art forms. It was a tremendous thing. In fact, the panoramic painting that I saw had been resurrected from somebody's barn. It had been the central showpiece of a country fair for many, many years, and it was now resurrected, and it was a panorama of the Civil War. Now, son, I want you to listen to this. And it bears very closely on what we're talking about. It was a panoramic view of the Civil War. It was over a block long, and it was in Indiana where they have long blocks. As a matter of fact, it stretched from Kokomo all the way to Terre Haute, which was a block out there. And this was a panoramic painting of the Civil War. Now, what the artist tried to do was to paint every soldier who had fought on the north and every soldier who had fought on the south. Now, at one time, there were over 3 million people under arms wearing the blue, and something like 3.5 million people wearing gray. So he had a job cut out for him. And he accomplished it. He certainly did. And not only that, he drew all the battles on one canvas. Not just a few of the battles, but all the battles of the Civil War, all the skirmishes, the peace treaties. He even touched a little bit on the antebellum period and on the postbellum period, over there near the right edge of the canvas and near the left edge of the canvas. Now, you see, what he was trying to do was to encompass it all. And I can remember walking along that for miles, it seemed like, looking at all those guys who'd fought that Civil War. And I remember my Aunt Gwen saying next to me, looking up, I think it was right near the Battle of Bull Run. She was looking up at the Battle of Bull Run, which actually was painted in particularly garish paint because he was in the middle of his mauve period. You see, it took this painter over 20 years to paint this. He went through several periods. He went through a mauve period. He went through a fauve period. He went through a period of complete representationalism. And then he got tired for a while and sagged in the middle. And then he went uphill all the way on up until he finally wound up in his pre-cubistic period with a big crash of symbols. It was a wonderful painting. And so I'm standing there next to my Aunt Glenn. My Aunt Glenn looks up there at that whole thing. She's standing by the Battle of Bull Run, and she says, "You know, sometimes I wonder where it's all going to end." I says, "Aunt Glenn, it's going to end over there near Kokomo." "I know." And she says, "No, that isn't what I mean, son. I wonder where it's all going to end." I says, "Well, Aunt Glenn, you can see the end down there where those people are gathering, eating the cotton candy down there. That's where the end is." She said, "No, that's not what I mean. I wonder where it's all going to end." Well, that reminded me, of course, one thing leads into the next. If you'll notice, I'm using my Indiana accent today. After having listened to Galen Drake do the Indiana program, which I enjoyed immensely, I'm once again under the influence of that great herd of cow herders and gum chewers which have come out of the Wabash Valley so many, many years ago. Well, that reminded me, too, of a scene which I don't know, I don't think, well, I might as well admit it. It just appeared once in my mind, to be perfectly honest with you. And of course, Saturday is a kind of day for these things to appear in your mind. Saturday has a gothic quality about it. I suppose some of you are aware of the derivation of the word Saturday, which refers to Saturn, which refers to Saturnalia, which refers to some things that happen occasionally on Saturday nights in Darien, Connecticut. We will not go into that. George, maybe we ought to. You know, isn't it funny how we all the time, I mean, we're involved in all this jazz, this business of communicating and so on. I was on a panel show the other day, a couple of weeks ago, on television, one of these big coast-to-coast type shows that somehow dot the networks during the summer more than they do in the wintertime. They come on, and they're always important type people who are discussing fantastically cosmic issues. Our panel today will now discuss the end of all mankind. They will take it from all aspects in 30 minutes. And now here is the Admiral. And the Admiral tells a little bit of his experience at the end of mankind and so on. And I was on a panel where we were discussing, of all things, the lack of communication between generations. And I was sitting there waiting for the thing to begin, and these are always very painful. I don't know whether you know much about the panel proposition. They're very painful before they get underway. It's as though debate has become showbiz. We'd like to have a little disagreement among you folks there, fellas. Let's speed it up there just before the first commercial. Got to have a little disagreement here and a little controversy we got to throw in there near the last. And you're sitting there, and everybody is kind of tense, and then the show begins, and you're discussing a question which seems to be as remote, as completely remote from what you're doing and from what you're feeling and what you're sensing as possibly a game of badminton could be. And you're just sitting there, and the question is going on, and nobody's really answering it, and everybody's playing his part. And it was my turn to say something, and it suddenly occurred to me, just what a ludicrous situation this was. On a Sunday morning, discussing the lack of communication between generations. And I couldn't figure out, first of all, what a generation was. I've been conscientiously trying to think of what is a generation, you know. Where does the demarcation line start and stop? Now, you can give me all the classical definitions. A generation is 21 years. Yeah, but there's a new crowd that starts every 30 seconds. Where do you stop, you know? And what generation am I part of? I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. That a lot of guys around here who are supposed to be of my generation, I am totally out of touch with at the station. I have met 9-year-old kids whom I communicate with completely, thoroughly. I have met 75-year-old women who immediately we can establish a rapport. I have met guys, it's as though, you know, the funny thing about this generation business, you hear a lot of talk about the Beat Generation, and most people seem to think that the Beat Generation, according to the classical definition, is a crowd of guys about 19 or 20 years old. Well, there is much evidence to the contrary. For example, how many of you know how old Jack Kerouac is? I mean, Kerouac is generally considered to be the spokesman of the Beat generation and so on. Of course, a lot of them now will object to that. But the fact is that he is generally considered to be that. And Kerouac is well up in his late 30s, as far as I know. In fact, I know he is. And yet, it's a very common thing. I've seen it time and time again, where some guy will be driving along, he's 35 years old, and he says, Kerouac, a bunch of crummy bunch of Beat generation crowd. And he's talking about his own generation. Apparently, he thinks he's talking about somebody who's 18 years old. And it goes back and forth. So there is no real, I think there is no genuinely classical, I'll do it, Russ. There's no, this is, speaking of Beat generations, this is WOR AM and FM New York. And we'll be here until 2 o'clock. I don't know what the Beat generation is supposed to be. I have no idea what Now, when I'm saying generation, I'm saying age differentiation. I want to show you something here. Now, listen carefully. I'll read a letter to you from a kid. Give you an idea of this. What made me think of all this is that I'm listening to Galen Drake this morning, and Drake is talking about Indiana. Well, I know something about Indiana. I came from Indiana. I lived in Chicago and Indiana. I was born in Chicago, lived there for a long time, then spent most of my formative years in Indiana, and then moved back to Chicago. So I know something about Indiana, and it's interesting that the Indiana that comes out generally is a bucolic sort of Indiana, is an Indiana of new-mown hay. It's an Indiana of the long... And by the way, I have seen the Wabash. I heard Galen say that he didn't remember how Well, I'll tell you how the Wabash looks. I used to fish in the Wabash quite often. The Wabash River, which... The Wabash that I fished in, of course, a Midwestern river is a very special thing. It is not like the Eastern rivers. You cannot parallel a Midwestern river with the Hudson, nor with the East River, or any of the rivers that you know in the eastern half of the United States. The Midwestern rivers are really, in many ways, much more of a way of life than the river that I have known here in the East. That much of the whole area around the river is built on the river. I've lived on the Ohio. I've lived on the Little Miami River, which is an interesting river out in the Midwest. And I've lived also near the Wabash. And a very colorful river in Indiana is the Kankakee. You ever heard of the Kankakee? Well, these rivers, they're all Indian names, actually. The Little Miami, the Kankakee, the Calumet is another Indian name. The rivers of Indiana are slow-moving, flat, coffee-colored streams. They are colored. It would be as if you took coffee and you put about half a teaspoon of milk in the coffee. You got this almost cream-colored coffee, but not quite. It's browner than that. And the willows and the sycamores and so on hang deep over the water. And generally speaking, are growing, many of them grow right in the water at certain periods of the year. But it's interesting, I have seen the disappearance of a river in my time. A river that completely disappeared from the earth. This is a frightening experience, but flowing about a mile from my home when I was a boy was a river called the Little Calumet. Calumet is the name. Are you familiar with Calumet baking powder? Do you know about this? Well, Calumet baking powder is made in that area, and Calumet is the name of an Indian tribe that lived in that area, the Calumet Indians, and the word Calumet itself means peace. For example, Illinois. Illinois is another name of a tribe, the Illinois or the Illini. That particular name means little onion. But this is all beside the point. The Indians that lived in that neighborhood had named this river the Little Calumet. Of course, it had gotten Americanized or anglicized since. But this slow-moving river that moved to the lake in this case being Lake Michigan, this slow-moving river moved through the farms. And one whole summer, I worked for a surveyor. And it was one of the most horrendous jobs that I've ever had in my life as far as working physically is concerned. I was in high school, and the surveyor came to high school looking for a couple of kids to work for him, and I got the job. And this was in the days when getting any kind of a job was a tremendous thing. And I got a job working all summer for a surveyor. And this surveyor was working on a project where he was laying out the lines that were to mark the edge of dredging operations for the widening of the Little Calumet River. And it was a tremendous operation, this job that we undertook. And it began in June, just about this time of the year, and it was hot. Oh, it was so hot. It was steaming hot down there in the river flatlands, and I might say this, that the rivers in Indiana are all surrounded by marshy country. They are not clearly marked off rivers the way you have here in the east, where you have the rock-bound rivers and that's it. There's a shore and the river flows. There are all sorts of marshy lands, and you go through swamps and so on. The rivers are very indefinite, and they overflow their banks all the time, too, at different times of the year. And so we began to work our way toward the lake from the county line, the county in this case being Lake County, Indiana. And it was a distance of about maybe 40 miles, something like that. That is total distance with the meanders included in the river. And we were working along at 25 and 30-yard intervals, staking out the river, and working through swamps and working through cornfields, and working through the most desperate parts of Indiana. And I remember this tremendous heat pressing down on me. Millions and millions and millions, an incalculable number of mosquitoes. The mosquitoes in the Indiana bottomland are indescribable. And working through this, and I'm a cool 15 years old. And like a 15-year-old, I don't want to do this. After about 3 days, this is not for me. But I couldn't get out of it. Have you ever had something, a job or something like a task, Don? Have you ever had something that you just could not duck out of, that it would have been impossible for you to duck out of, and you just had to do it, and you get this fantastic boredom? You're so bored that your head is bulging out like a balloon, and you just sort of walk in a daze, and every time anybody gives you a chance for the slightest break, a lunch break or a break to have a bottle of Coke or something, you just look forward to every minute to this break. Well, this summer dragged on, and I began to be bored by about the middle of June, and by about the middle of July, my head was numb from the top of all the way down to my ankles with boredom. I was bored for one complete summer and thoroughly covered from head to foot with mosquito bites. And I remember slogging through the swamp and chopping away for the chain man. Do you know what a chain man is in surveying terms? Well, my job was forward chain man and pin man with the surveyor. And I would go ahead with the chain. The chain is that long steel tape, that long steel ruler that surveyors use. You know, when you learn something about surveying, just a little bit, you realize what real labor is. Do you know that it is, well, it is that somebody has measured America from one end to the other, inch by inch, with a steel measuring tape? Are you aware of that? That every yard of this country has been measured with steel tapes and with little pins, and this immense amount of labor, which seems to be such a lost labor, on that great big arching sky and that fantastic pressure of heat. And this is what I remember much of Indiana. The rivers, of course, of Indiana. But then on the other hand, this business of communicating, I'm listening to Drake, and I'm saying, what about the other part of Indiana, the side of Indiana that hardly anybody knows, that Norman Rockwell ever paints? Indiana also is a state of tremendous slums. Are you aware that there are more slums in Indiana than in many of the states which you generally consider to be real slum states? For example, there are several cities I know of that are composed almost entirely of slums. For example, Gary, Indiana, is practically all slums. All slums. I mean real slums. I mean the kind of slums where you have the all-night chili parlors and the fist fights. Are you aware that there is a town called Indiana Harbor, Indiana, that is as tough a city as you'll find this side of the Barbary Coast? That is a fact. This is a city where it is worth your life to go into at 3 o'clock in the morning because, any minute now it'll happen. Have you ever heard of Calumet City, Illinois, which is right across the border from Indiana, right across from Hammond, Indiana? Calumet City is a city so wild. It is a city so completely devoid of any sort of morality at all that even when, in the broad daylight, you can stand 2 miles away from Calumet City and you see a red glow in the air. I'm telling you the truth. There is a red glow of neon night and day. Many of the denizens of Calumet City have not seen daylight for maybe 30 years. And Calumet City, of course, which in many of the same areas is like a waterfront town. You know what the difference between a waterfront city and a non-waterfront city is that you have a population of transients, laboring class. This is the seaman who comes in. He comes in for 3 days. He's got money to spend. He spends it, and boy, he spends it the way he wants to spend. There's always somebody there to take it. Believe me, they gather like flies at a hog killing, to use an old Indiana term. There will always be those who are there to shuck the honest toiler of his honest gains, and they will do it in any fashion, any manner that he wants them to do it. You see, and so. And there are always those, don't think. And this is what makes a seaport town what it is. Marseille is a seaport. Have you ever been to Marseille? Well, you know what I'm talking about. Any real seaport town has that international, no border area, no holds barred, no nationality quality about it. Well, there are inland seaport towns. I don't know whether anybody's ever reported on this. If they haven't, I'm reporting on it right now. There are such things as inland seaport towns that have nothing to do with water because they are based on exactly the same premises that the seaport world is based on. That is to say, the honest toiler who is there to be shucked and who has no scruples, no more, and is completely ready for anything that will happen. And like flies at a hog killing, they gather. And such a town is a town named Calumet City, Indiana, or it's actually Illinois, but it lays right on the border. In fact, there's a street named State Line Street, and one half of the street is Illinois and the other half is Indiana, and State Line Street runs right down the middle of Calumet City. Well, now the reason that these things build themselves up is usually because of legal situations. And Indiana is partially a dry state. Indiana is a state that has very tightly controlled liquor laws, and the taverns close at midnight, and there's a certain amount of taverns per population. They are controlled as far as the kind of entertainment they can have and so forth. And so what happens, you see, when you have a tremendous population of real tough guys, which is exactly what you have in the steel mills. You have all the great steel mills curving around that long bend of the lake, that long bend of Lake Michigan that hangs right down on the northern end of Indiana. If you take a look at a map, and you'll find Lake Michigan just skims along the northern edge. In fact, the northern border of Indiana is the lake shore. And Indiana swings on up just a little bit and touches the very edge of Chicago. And right in that area, you have this tremendous, what is the inland equivalent of a seaborne population, and that is the swing shift laborer who works in the steel mill. Now, many of these guys are transients, and you have thousands of them. As a matter of fact, when you see the mill letting out at midnight, there are something like 20,000 men come out of one mill. There's a tremendous population of people, you realize, and these guys have all got money, and they don't want to go home. And many of them don't have any home. Most of them live in the railroad YMCA, and they are ready to swing. But everything has closed in Indiana. And there, a half a mile away, is the state line. And there at the state line has gathered this little humble group of Arabs who are willing to trade. And you can see the neon glow over there. And like a great horde of locusts, they descend Calumet City. And at maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, the streets, they don't even have traffic moving through most of the streets in Calumet City. You just walk along in the middle of the street. Millions of guys, all of them wearing overalls and some of them carrying lunch buckets and going from one joint to the next. And this is a part of Indiana you never hear talked about. But this is a kind of an inland seaport town. And there are others. I can tell you about some of the inland seaport towns in northern Kentucky. I don't know whether you've spent a Saturday night in Covington, Kentucky, ever, but unless you have, you don't really know what America is about. Many people here in the East don't really understand America. Many people, of course, in the Midwest don't understand America either because they've never moved. But to anyone who has moved back and forth across this country, you realize that there is something wild in the country. There is something wild in the country, and the native of Central America is as inexplicable to the Easterner as, say, a native of the Bulgar flatlands is to a native of Paris. They're just, you might speak some of the same language, but none of the same prejudices and none of the same worries and fears. Did you ever see a snake chucking? Well, I remember one time in northern Kentucky. I'll tell you about a snake chucking. This is a religious group in Kentucky and in Tennessee who gather illegally, by the way, occasionally on a Sunday afternoon to allow rattlesnakes to bite them, to prove their piety in the eye of God. And I can remember coming over a hill one day, driving my car, and there's a great crowd of people gathered off in a field under a grove of trees in Kentucky. And there's a little sign that had been stuck on the edge of the road there, just a piece of wood with a white piece of paper, and it says snake chucking today. A snake chucking today. So I pull up my car and I walk over the cornfields and into the grove of woods, and there they were, whooping and hollering, rolling around. They had 4 big rattlesnakes that they had taken out of baskets, and the faithful were stepping up and allowing them to bite them on the wrists. And this rising cry, and then suddenly someone says, the sheriff's coming. And they broke like a crowd of mosquitoes at the sound and the sight of a flit gun. And they scattered into the woods and hiding in the bushes. And the sheriff drove up and he caught a couple of natives wearing these blue overalls. Now, I'm standing right there, obviously an outlander. He said, I hear there's a snake chucking going on here. Well, what do you mean, Sheriff? No snake chucking here. We've just been having a reunion. It's a reunion? Yes, we've been having a reunion. Reunion of the Johnson family. And, of course, you can find millions of Johnsons all over Kentucky. Anytime you're going to have a reunion or a crap game, you say it's a reunion of the Johnson family. Happened to Johnson. He says, okay, just thought there was a little trouble going on here. And he got back in his Ford V8 and drove on down the road, and the snake chucking continued. Well, now, what I'm merely referring to here is the great heartland of America, and this is the America that is alive now. This is not 100 years ago. As a matter of fact, this happened in 1951. This is the land. This is the country. This is the great seething mass that we're all part of. Now, we're hanging on the edge of the Bronx and on Staten Island. We have our own mores here. I think, in many ways, New York is a kind of country within a country, as is the case, incidentally, with most seaport towns. I have been particularly fascinated with something that A.J. Liebling, who I think is one of the great reporters of America, has been doing recently in The New Yorker. I don't often find things which excite me these days in The New Yorker, but the last couple of weeks, A.J. Liebling, he writes, I'll tell you why I like Liebling. First of all, Liebling has obviously a great interest in all the activities of mankind. Something that bothers me is to find a man who will walk away from things which are going on because he doesn't like them. Oh, this is wrong. You should stand and look. You should watch this great crowd at the ball game. You should hear this guy hollering, "Come on, baby, hang in there." This is all part of it, you know. You should go to the snake chunking and just stand off and look. And if you do stand off and look enough, you'll begin to have this great love of it all, which is an undeniable thing. Nelson Algren made a remark which I think should be reported at this juncture. Algren was talking about love. The love for people and the love for the land. And he said that he has noticed that the more people knock around and the more difficulties they have been in, the more, the way he put it, the more knocks on the side of the head they have gotten, and probably the more afternoons they have spent working in the open hearth and the steel mill, the more respect they have for mankind and the more love they have for the whole panoply of it all. And he went on to say that the people who somehow slip into it easily, who go to the good Eastern school, who immediately have the good agent, who immediately slip into a nice job at life, they begin to be cynical. They begin to have the ability to talk out of the side of the mouth and become very, yes, I've seen this myself. Of course, it is not a generality. It shouldn't be taken that, but I have seen it. A very interesting thing about living in this country. Very few of us really know anything about. Anybody has ever tried to encompass all of it. Our national literature, which has fascinated me for a long time, rarely even touches on the life that is really lived by people. You don't think for a minute that J.D. Salinger really writes about the life that is lived by many, many people. Thomas Wolfe tried. Some people have tried to deal with it. Mark Twain never did. Mark Twain was more of a fabulist than anything else. But the stories of the Calumet cities of the world, of the Indiana world, the stories of the Covington, Kentucky. I remember one night, I'll tell you a little incident that happened that might give you some insight into what kind of a world we're living in. I happened to be living on Madison Avenue in Covington, Kentucky. Madison Avenue in Covington, Kentucky. Somehow the irony of it all. And I was living above a jewelry store in an apartment that was built directly over the steam, the boiler, the pressure boiler that built up steam for this building. And I can remember night after night after night in the middle of summer, my floor was so hot I couldn't put my feet on it, and I could just feel this whole building seething with great heat. And down in the courtyard, a Kentucky cab driver would return from work at about 4 o'clock every morning. You see, I worked late. I had a radio show that I used to wind up about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was then I began to know something about the night world of the whole panoply of it all. And you know, incidentally, it has bothered me so much what has happened to the term night people, which I have always regretted coining. This is a term which I coined, and I will stand accused and guilty of it. And I notice that people have taken it up and have used it to cover all sorts of sins of omission and commission. It has nothing to do with Walter Winchell's world of busboys, nothing to do with Walter Winchell's world and Damon Runyon's world of cab drivers. This is not the night people that I'm referring to. I'm talking about with that wild tossing in the soul that somehow makes them stay up to 3 o'clock in the morning and brood. They might get up at 7 the next morning and go to work. But that isn't what their life is about. Not a bit of it. And I began to know something about this world and began to be part of it. And as a matter of fact, always have been philosophically, until finally I became not only philosophically, but every other way involved in it. And so, to me, generally, the world is not what it is until it's 3 or 2 or 1 o'clock in the morning. It begins to have a sharp focus to it. It has nothing to do with metabolic rates either. This is another story, too. I remember reading a couple of weeks ago, some clown out on the West Coast is writing about the beats, and he says he didn't want to use the term night people. And so he says, we are the nocturnal people. Probably felt that he was coining an original phrase. But that's neither here nor there. The Nelson Algren is probably as close a blood brother as far as philosophical outlook on the world that he knows as anybody I know in literature. When I say blood brother, I mean to me. If there is anyone whom I vibrate to, it's probably Algren, and I'm sure that Algren vibrates to my stuff too, which is neither here nor there. But I remember a thing that Liebling did. It's in the current New Yorker. If you want to get a little insight into some of our time, Liebling is doing a piece, I don't know whether it's a 2 or 3 part article, on Louisiana politics and the state of Louisiana itself. And he makes the point that New Orleans is part of the Hellenistic world. I don't know whether many people are aware that our country, like every other part of the world, falls into spheres of cultural influence that lie outside of the borders of the United States. And New Orleans is one of the great areas that does. It's part of the Hellenistic world, and he makes a beautiful picture of Louisiana. But I remember one time I'm living in Covington, and this is sort of a postscript to this thing. I don't know why I'm doing a show like this. I hope I'm not boring you this morning. But I was listening to Galen Drake talk about Indiana, and there is so much to be said about our country, and there is so little said. And when it is said, it generally is said in the unreal terms of the sentimentalist, the sad terms of somebody who hasn't really looked at what it's about, but nevertheless plays upon a Valentine to something that never was. One of the beautiful things that A.J. Liebling points out, we have the national, it's a kind of a superstition, that before Civil War days, the South was this beautiful place and wonderful people lived in it. And all these towns were lovely, and there was a great sense of peace, and the banjos playing on the veranda at dusk. And he writes a piece on how the South really was before the Civil War. It was nothing at all like that. Nothing. We have a tendency to romanticize. Not only romanticize, but even worse, sentimentalize. And I can't sentimentalize about Indiana. I can say this about Indiana. It is a unique state, but then every other state is too. It is really unique, though, of course, there's no such thing as being really more or less unique. But Indiana, in my experience, has such a wide diversity of culture that from this type of culture has sprung the great humorists of our world, the songwriters of our world. And the reason for this is because they are constantly confronted with that split right down the middle of mankind, that great split, the urban man and the bucolic man. They are split between the frontier and civilization. And even to this day, Indiana is part frontier and part civilization. But I remember one night looking out of my apartment in Covington, Kentucky, at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm looking out, and there's a parking lot across the way next to a White Castle where the hamburgers, and everybody in this White Castle, by the way, were from southern Kentucky, and they came from a fabled county. There is a fabled county down in southern Kentucky where a law-abiding man is considered a real freak, and where anyone who represents the law is, he's expendable. Not only is he can't get any sort of insurance at all. And these Kentuckians would come up, and they would man all the all-night diners and all the all-night juke joints, and they work in them. They work the hot plate. And so night after night, I had adopted a kind of a Kentucky accent, because you have to have a Kentucky accent, or else they just don't cotton to you. They just don't cotton to you, and they don't talk to you. So you sit down there at the end of the counter, and you'll say, "I'll have 2 dogs, please. 2 dogs." And the man behind the counter say, "How you want them? You want them with mustard, or do you want them plain?" And then you say, "I'll have them with mustard." And then you sit there for a minute, and you have to do this. It's part of the social ritual. You put a nickel in the jukebox, and you put on generally a Hank Snow record, or let's say you put on a Roy Acuff record. And Roy comes on singing about the Red River Valley. "I'm lonesome for my home in the Red River Valley." And you throw that nickel in, you sit there and you eat your dog, and then another guy wanders in, a tall, thin guy. And he's from Corbin, Kentucky. He sits down back of the counter and he says, "Hi, Luke." And Luke says, "Heidi, Frank. You want the regular?" Frank says, "Yep, I want, you got any hot vegetable soup tonight?" And he says, "Yep." And the world just sort of flows on. It's that kind of world. And about every 20 minutes or so, some guy comes in from one of the local taverns. The hillbillies live in taverns. Theirs is the tavern world. And one will come in, and he'll sit down there belligerently for a while, and then he'll go wandering off. And one night I'm looking out of the window, and I see a parking lot down there, and they're stripping a car. They're stripping a car right under the light, so I called up the police. I said, "Hey, they're stripping a car right down here next to the White Castle." And the cop says, "Mind your own business. Mind your own business." He could tell I was an outlander. Now, speaking of outlanders, this is Harold Monolith. We'll be back in 15 minutes.
This is WOR Radio, your station for news.
Yes, friends, it's time now for Chuck Acree and his Colorado Cowhands. Oh. I'll tell you one thing I remember clearly and distinctly. I remember walking along on a Saturday night, walking through the streets of an Indiana town and hearing the sound coming from every front porch, from every kitchen, and from every living room. The sound of a WLS barn dance. You walk along those streets, you'd hear nothing but the sound of those mosquitoes. You'd hear the sound of those mosquitoes and Montana Slim. Or you'd hear the sound of Gene Autry. Or Lula Bell and Scotty. You'd hear the and you walk along there, and then you'd hear somebody say, "It's time now for," what was the name? Our War, the brass figurine with bronze oak leaf palm. To anyone who can give me the name of the guy who used to have the little 5-watter. You remember him? He used to do the radio show, had a little 5-watter. And what was the name of the town, the mythical town that his little 5-watt radio station broadcasted from? And this was all part of the WLS barn dance. And I would hear that plucking and that singing. I would hear that shouting and that carrying on. And this is all part of it. There is in the air in our land. There is in the air in our land. Here in America, there is something that is wild, there is something that is free, there is something also that is so fugitive, so furtive, and at the same time so blatantly, well, the word is, it goes even more than wild. But writers who feel this, who sense this, who know this in the air, driven to the extremes of panegyric, they're driven to the extremes of creative limits, trying to put it down on paper or to put it into words, trying to say it. I've been trying to say it now so long that I don't know where the next word is coming from. I know writers, Nelson Algren has been trying to say it. Thomas Wolfe tried to say it, and the most interesting man to come along in a long time to try to say that, to try to talk about this something that is wild in the country, is Tennessee Williams. Williams touches from time to time. Oh yes, don't. You know, it's a funny thing about Williams. Williams does from time to time touch on this wildness, and I'm not talking about the decadence. I'm not talking about the perversity. I'm talking about that strange, wild, fugitive sound, that incessant rain that beats in the soul of some people. The rain that just constantly rattles down on the corrugated roofs of our lives, that tells us to go, man, go and go. I remember walking over a field one time, a cantaloupe field. In Indiana, you know, there's nothing as wonderful as a sun-ripened muskmelon, or mushmelon, or cantaloupe. Depending on what part of the state you come from is the way you pronounce it, muskmelon, mushmelon, or cantaloupe. And I remember walking over a cantaloupe field one day with that hot sun coming down and those cantaloupe vines crawling along that gray-brown soil. And about a block and a half away, you could see the flat, long row of weeping willow trees where the river was quietly drying up. And you can smell that soil, you can smell those cantaloupes, and you can feel that wild thing that makes people run, that makes the Sherwood Andersons run out into the world and try to say it. In Winesburg, Ohio. But it's all part of it, and there is also, as coupled with that, the wildness of a kind of a religious fear, a sort of knowledge that great sky is about to fall down on everybody. I remember one time watching a farmhouse burn down. I'll never forget this. It was in southern Michigan, and I had been fishing in a little lake with my brother, and it was a long, hot summer day, and looking up on that hillside, we saw a pinpoint of light, and we knew it was a fire. You could see it flicker, and so we beached the boat and ran up the side of the hill among all the cows, and you could begin to smell the smoke as you got about halfway up the hill, and the sun was beating down. It was 120 degrees, that long, hot, humming summer sound of of southern Michigan and northern Indiana. You know, the summers, you know it's summertime in Indiana when it begins to hum. The air actually hums. You can hear the cicadas beginning to scream out, that wow, and that long, long humming sound of just the air itself, rising and falling and pushing over that hot, parched ground. And we ran up the side of the hill, and the farmhouse burnt right down to the very ground, and the people just stood around, maybe 25 people, and the farmers tried to pour water on it. Nothing could save it. And we walked back and got in the boat and went out and began to fish again for sunfish. And there is that thing Wild that says, look out, any minute now. And the hillbillies going from bar to bar, and the sound of those eternal guitars on those twangy noses. And you begin to know then that there is much that is not much. And one of the great quests of the let's say the disinherited, and these are the hillbillies who neither work the soil nor spin nor toil, but sort of just float. They're flotsam and jetsam in that great bowl of the Midwest. They just float on the surface from city to city, and they work a job, and then they leave job, and then they move to the next town and work there. They're a kind of modern-day gypsy. You know, did you know that the Midwestern cities are having their immigration problems? Are you aware of that? We have our great minority problems here, people coming up from Puerto Rico and so on. Well, they have their great minority problem. And it's the great disenchanted, disinherited that float up from Tennessee and Kentucky and drift around on the outskirts of the cities and build their own slums as fast as they can move in. It's a wild thing that is going on out there. But nevertheless, you see these people drifting from bar to bar, and the great quest seems to be to discover a new kind of sin. and it's a quest of discovery. It's a quest of a kind of Sodom and Gomorrah that makes most of the things that Tennessee Williams writes about, to anyone who has experienced it, seem like not only not depravity at all, but a kind of a realistic record of the Bobbsey twins. I don't know whether you've wandered along State Street in Calumet City on a Saturday night, and have dropped into the shows and have watched the faces and have heard the shouts and the cries in the night. You begin to understand that the things that many writers write about are not at all depravity. And people say, why do they write about them? Well, they write about them because they are there. They write because they are an important part of the lives of many people. I remember one night I used to do a radio show when I was a kid out of a bar. I was doing a remote. I was an announcer working. I was in school, actually in high school at the time. And we did a remote out of a bar in Calumet City. It was a lawless town. And I can tell you some stories about that sometime. Radio in a lawless town. It was really a lawless city, and we were doing a remote out of there, and it was a cowboy group. They go great for cowboy music there. Not hillbilly, but cowboy. And doing this remote, we'd set up the equipment about a half an hour before, and all the denizens, the regulars, were sitting along the bar, this long, dark bar. And there was a man working the bar who had been a strong-arm man for the Capone mob. As a matter of fact, most of them in that area at one time or another had been involved in that particular facet of American history, the guys who ran many of the places in this city. They'd been run out of Chicago, and Calumet City was kind of a city all by itself. It was kind of like a free port. It was. It really was. It had no connection with Illinois or any other known state. It just sort of existed there. And this guy was behind the bar, a kind of a completely taciturn, sort of smoky, drifting creature who never said much to anybody, but obviously was an extremely dangerous man. And about half an hour before the broadcast, somebody walked in and sat down at the end of the bar and just sat. And immediately I sensed it, and the engineer who was with me sensed it, and the cowboy singer sensed it. We didn't say anything. We just sat back at the bar amid our equipment. And there was this electric atmosphere. And the bartender, who was also the man who ran the place, who was also one of the great politicians in the town, walked out from behind the bar without saying a word. And he went up behind the man and put his arm around his neck from behind. And he pushed him by the ribs, took him to the door, picked him up bodily, and threw him out against the fire hydrant, whereupon he promptly broke his neck and immediately died. He walked back into the tavern and stood behind the bar, made a phone call. Nobody out on the street even paused. The body was lying across the sidewalk. They just walked right on past. And nobody in the bar said a word. They just continued to drink their beer. He made a phone call, and a couple of men appeared, took the victim away, and that was all that was ever said. 10 minutes later, we went on the air, and it was as if nothing had happened. But it had, and I remembered it cleanly and distinctly. There it is, impressed right on my memory. And you see these things, and you are part of these things for a certain period of time, and you begin to understand that much that we say quietly pussyfoots around the truth of the life that speaking of the truth, we have with us today the Paper Book Gallery. And I don't like to suddenly deviate from what we're doing here, but it really isn't in a sense, because the other day I was down in the gallery and I picked up a volume of short stories by Nelson Algren, and I would highly recommend this to you. I don't care where you buy them, but you get another flavor of this world, of this land we live in, which is a wildly wonderful land. I've been in many other countries, and I have never once detected that same frontier wildness that we have, a strong and a flowing thing in America. It is an undiminished thing. That movement from bar to bar. Have you ever heard the expression that the hillbillies use, you want to go juking? I saw this pop up in a movie the other night. Funny, the person who was with me said, what do you mean by juking? You know what juking is? Juking is a hillbilly term. It is a Saturday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, I got nothing to do, and so let's go out juking term. And they move from bar to bar, and they throw a couple of quarters in the jukebox of every bar. And they don't dance, you know. This is the impression that people like to give you, that they go to just listen to the music. No. They go juking, drinking beer, and looking for trouble. And the thing that they're really looking for is trouble. Because trouble is a sport. Trouble is a sport, and it's really a competitive sport. And it's not a good night unless there's some flashing blades in the dark. It's not a good night. Well, anyway, we have with us the Paper Book Gallery, and I would like to recommend, if you drop down there tonight, to pick up a volume of Nelson Algren's Neon Wilderness. He talks about the sad Milwaukee Avenue moon of home, which is that sad moon that shines down on Republic Steel, on the long, tired, moiling south sides of everywhere. And this is Nelson Algren's Neon Wilderness, and we're talking about the Paper Book Gallery. There are two paper book galleries, and I don't know of a more pleasant place in New York just to quietly spend an hour or two than the gallery down on Sheridan Square. And if you're looking for a place to just spend a couple of hours, just to feel New York the way New York really is, or at least one element of it, I would suggest either one of the two paper book galleries. I get calls from people from all over the country who come in and say, I heard about it on your show, and by George, it's the greatest thing I've seen yet in town. The paper book gallery, the one that I like particularly, is on Sheridan Square, and it's over on the east side of the square. The west side. It's on the west side. I'm never good on directions. It's on the west side where 10th Street comes into 7th Avenue South, and it's called the Paper Book Gallery. And you'll see a great big flashing sign up high up in the sky there at night. And they're open until 2 o'clock this morning, the Paper Book Gallery on Sheridan Square, and there's one over on 3rd Street. And if you drop in tonight, just look the guy in the eye and just say Excelsior, and he knows you're a friend. Speaking of friends, this is WOR AM at FM, New York, and we have with us, right next to the gallery, by the way, if you'd like to spend an hour or two enjoying a meal, the likes of which you will seldom see in New York, we would like to recommend Yin and Yang. It's a difficult thing for people. It's an interesting thing, too, that in this city, a great city, which I think New York is, it's an unparalleled city in the world, that it is often very difficult to find a good place to eat in. And it's just surprising to me. And yet we have probably the greatest panoply of restaurants in the world. I can say this, though, unfortunately, I think that the food in the average American city ranges from superb to absolutely abysmal. And you can never tell by the prices. You just can't tell by the prices. Yeah, I've gone into restaurants where I paid really high prices for meals and have come away completely dissatisfied. Matter of fact, I would enjoy a good, honest Needix hot dog more than I would some of the expensive restaurants in town as food and as an honest expression of a certain kind of food. And if you're looking for a really good Oriental restaurant, I would suggest Yin and Yang. They have a nice bar, but the food is superb, the whole atmosphere is good, and they're open until 1 o'clock in the morning, and they're on 3rd Street, 82 West 3rd Street, and they're open Sundays. If you're coming into town, and I find New York extremely exciting in the middle of summer. I hate to leave New York even for a day, because there is some of that wildness is in this town during the summertime. No other time do I really feel it except maybe late Friday nights in January. But Yin and Yang is over on 3rd Street, 82 West 3rd, and they're open from noon Sunday to about 1 o'clock in the morning. So if you're looking for a Sunday dinner place, this is it. A superb Chinese cuisine, and incidentally, one of the great gourmet magazines recently pointed them out as being one of the 5 outstanding Chinese restaurants in the United States. It's a magnificent restaurant. The prices are very moderate, and I personally, if you drop in, if you really want something that you've never had before, I would personally recommend that you ask for their chicken wing appetizers. This is a magnificent dish. It is not at all. You know, chicken wing. When Bill Chan said to me, "Try our chicken wings," Bill is the operator of the place. He said, "Try chicken. Go ahead, try it." Chicken wings. I immediately had the feeling that I was back in the Army. I was getting either chicken wings or cold cuts. I will award the brass figdigi with bronze oak leaf palm for any ex-GI who can who can give me. No, I better not. I mean, there are laws about that. What? Just look this chick in the eye that you're with and smile at her and tell her you know what the Army appellation for cold cuts is. Another word. She said, "What's he talking about? What is it now, Charlie? Tell me what it is." I didn't say it. You said it, and it was part of the Army. But when he said chicken wings, I had that feeling. Oh. And anyway, when it arrived, I'm a real addict now. And in fact, many times I go down to Yin and Yang, and all I have are chicken wings. I have chicken wings and a little tea and some rice, and I'm ready. This is Yin and Yang, 82 West 3rd Street, and I would like to recommend that you call before you go. Because you're liable to find that they're all filled up. There are only 18 tables in the place. 82 West 3rd Street. You know, speaking of experimenting with sin and the whole panoply of Midwestern world, it's an interesting thing to know, really to know, to have lived through, to have been, and we all have passed, you know. It's funny, I get all kinds of letters from people who say, you know, gee whiz, wow, we all have lived. There's this long tape recorder that is this thing of life, and there behind us, each one of us, is this long reel of tape, and it's got stuff all over it. It's got stuff all over it, and it just merely remains for the editor to come along and look at it to make some sense out of it. That's all. To make some sense and to make some focus come into being. Like one time, I'm sitting on a bench. I'm sitting on a park bench in Bughouse Square. Do you know of Bughouse Square in Chicago? Well, Bughouse Square in Chicago is something. Oh, sure, you know about Bughouse Square. It's famous. Well, Bughouse Square is where all the orators, the sidewalk orators, congregate to orate. And Bug House Square is a real institution in Chicago. I think the only parallel that we have here in New York is the rapidly dying institution of Union. But Bug House Square did not relate only to social conditions. That anybody who had something bugging him, anybody who was bugged by something, and that's where the term, of course, Bug House is a Midwestern term for bug house. And Bug House Square was where the guys would get up on their soapbox, and each guy would wait his turn. And he would stand. I remember one guy used to come to Bug House Square, and I would sit on the park bench and I would watch him work. He was a majestic figure to watch work. And this guy was a guy who was bugged on health foods. And he was kind of an early Dr. Carlton Fredericks, only unsponsored, and with no knowledge whatsoever. But he was bugged. And he would get up on that soapbox, and he had ragged clothes, and he had a look in the eye. And he would stand up there, and he would level down at his listeners. He'd say, "Now look here, you guys. I'm not going to be here today talking to you about the Red Menace. I'm not going to talk to you about our English brothers across the sea. This is just the way he talked. He had a beautiful flowery expression. I'm going to talk to you about what's happening to your lower colon. I'm going to talk to you about sin and chopped cabbage." And he would go on and on and on. Somehow he paralleled the rise of sin, the rise of Al Capone, the rise of Machine Gun Kelly, the rise of Pretty Boy Floyd, with the lack of roughage in the diet of the average Midwesterner. And he would go on and on and on for about a half an hour, and then when he would finish, it was such a feat of virtuosity that the crowd would roar with a great applause, and he would step down, and then the next guy would step up who was a socialist. And he would talk about government-owned telephone companies. and this tradition, I guess, still remains. It's still part of the world of Chicago, and in fact, I've noticed that more and more people are beginning to be aware of the interesting development of a kind of renaissance that is coming out of Chicago in the last couple of years. People like Shelley Berman and Mike and Elaine and the Compass Theater and all this is kind of springing out, and the satirical theater has become a really going institution in that city. And the theater is finally performing the function that it originally set out to do, and that is to bring into focus the world in which we live and to comment on it, rather than to merely entertain, which seems to be what the chief function of the theater is in the New York area. But I can remember that rising late summer evening world of Bug House Square and all the rest of the shouts and the hollerings that went up and down North Clark Street. It's all part of it. It reminds me of this. Somebody sent this little thing to me a couple of nights ago on the Sunday night show. Speaking of the hillbillies' constant quest for a new sin. Of course, he isn't alone in that. Somebody sent me a note about a preacher who had been asked out in the Midwest. Of course, this is the thing that Mencken used to call. This is the area that he used to refer to as the Bible Belt. And somebody was interviewing an evangelist about sin, and the evangelist said, "There are 785 sins, and all men are sinners. There are 785 sins in each one of them." And of course, this is a very intriguing thing, that the man had finally pinpointed it, that there were 785 sins. Well, as soon as I heard about this, I sat down and I started to count over the sins that I knew, that I really knew about. And I could figure out about 9. Really, and then I began to realize how much I had missed in this world, you know, and so this article went on to say that the minister was besieged, this evangelist was besieged with mail from people asking him for a list of the sin. What are these 785 sins? And most of them came from guys who figured they'd been missing out on something. Well, not more than about 3 days later, I don't know whether you're aware of the guy who draws Little Orphan Annie. Now, he is a two-headed monster. On the one side, he is probably the most out-and-out blatant propagandist in America, who works in the comic strip medium, which is a very effective medium, by the way. I'll never forget how how the asp used to settle all problems. He merely beheaded his opponents. And how old Daddy Warbucks would arrive on the scene, and the villains or the miscreants never had a fair trial. They merely would call on the asp and Punjab would throw a cape over them, make them disappear, and asp would behead them as they were in the process of disappearing. And that settled all sin. And of course, this came into full flower during the McCarthy period, when when this particular side of the American sense of justice began to override all other reasonable men's small outcries down in the bushes. And of course, this is a thing that Little Orphan Annie has advocated for a long time. Well, down underneath the Little Orphan Annie thing is a little strip where obviously his sneaky side comes out. He also draws that. It's called Ma Green. And here it shows Ma. I'll read this to you. A couple of weeks ago, it shows Ma standing there, and she's got an amused look on her face, and you see behind her is a guy who's got his hat pushed back of his head, and his hair is... And by the way, he has a bow tie. Everybody instinctively mistrusts a man who wears a bow tie. Remember that. And he's wearing a blue bow tie, which is the sneakiest kind of bow tie. Blue ones are worse than any other color. So he's wearing a blue bow tie and a hat pushed back on his head, and he's talking to the mailman. And this sneaky-looking character says, "You sure you got nothing for me?" And the mailman, who looks like Will Rogers, says, "Nope, nothing today." And Ma says to him, "You expecting an important letter?" And now the sneaky guy looks at Ma and he says, "I'll say I am. I heard that preacher feller on the radio say that there's 742 different sins. I wrote 'em for the list." And Ma says, "Why?" And now he's tipping his hat over his eye and walking away, and he says, "Well, only seems reasonable. I'd like to know if I've been missing something." This in the comic strips. He did another one, too, a couple of months ago that I'll never forget. Shows Ma, little kids asking Ma about something, and Ma says, "Well, I'll tell you, a bachelor is a guy who goes to work from a different direction every morning." You'll have to run back and field that one against the vines. It's all part of the same thing. And it's interesting to note that not one person remembers the name of the guy who broadcast on the Little Five Water. And while on the subject of the Little Five Water, we have with us Lufthansa Airlines. And speaking of Chicago, I see that Lufthansa has just in their new overseas service that flies directly from Chicago to Paris, which is somehow grotesque. I mean, it just doesn't seem right. And I understand that boats are coming right into the Great Lakes now. They're sailing right into the Great Lakes and right up that old St. Lawrence River, right down the Straits of Mackinac, and right over to Cleveland, right down to Chicago, flying the Dutch flag. And it just doesn't seem right. But nevertheless, if you're planning to fly the coop, we would like to recommend that you consider Lufthansa, which has become more and more the really preferred airlines among most European travelers, and for very good reasons. Everything is done right on Lufthansa. And believe me, I'm not going to sit here and talk to you about taking an overseas trip merely because of the kind of food that's served on an airplane. This is ridiculous. But I can say this, that you will never experience a trip the likes of the type and the kind that you will experience on any class, any class of Lufthansa flight. I mean, they do it right all the way down the line, everything. Matter of fact, I was sitting in the plane, a little incident that happened, and after we had finished dinner on the Lufthansa plane, which is a magnificent thing that goes on for at least 4,000 miles at that rate of speed that a 707 flies, you're high up. Did I tell you about the two French fighters saluting the Lufthansa plane when I was in the plane? Yeah, we were flying about 37,000 feet, high out over the French coast, coming back from Frankfurt on the Lufthansa plane, when suddenly I saw a couple of little glints off over the starboard wing, and sure enough, closer and closer they came, and suddenly both of them began to appear really as objects, and I saw that they were a pair of French vampire jets, and both of them saluted the plane. They made a big chandelle, and they saluted this big 707 because it was the first German 707 transcontinental, transoceanic jet flight. and they were kind of giving us a French salute, and they peeled off on sight. But just about that time, after dinner was over, the steward wheeled out a barrel of German beer, very light, very wonderfully light, delicious Hanoverian beer. And they began to serve this beer out of an actual keg. It was not served out of bottles or anything. And I asked him, I says, how do you keep the pressure up at this atmosphere? And he said, it took him 1.5 years to design a moving, airborne, supersonic keg. It's a very difficult thing to keep the pressure in a beer keg. Of course, the plane's pressure, they have pressurized cabins, but the pressure varies as you go from one altitude to the next. And this beer keg is a real triumph of German ingenuity. But it's an example of the kind of attention to detail. So if you're planning an overseas flight, you really should investigate Lufthansa. Everything is done right. That's Lufthansa. You sure? I mean, are you sure? and it's a world of its own, Speaking of the world of its own, I'm not so sure whether or not of course, our own ideal of reality is strictly our own. I remember one time, speaking of the Midwest, I remember this about the Midwest, that everyone, there was a remark made in a magazine recently about the theater, why Chicago doesn't have a good theater. Well, I've had a theory about it for a long time, and my theory is roughly this, that here in the East, when a person goes to the theater, he goes, first of all, to the theater. This is a big capital letter thing. He goes to the theater. And it is a whole preparation before he goes in. He is prepared for the theater. He is a true believer when he walks through those doorways. He is experiencing something which has been part of his long time. And as this being the case, since he is a believer and it's part of his life, he loses a large portion of his critical powers. As a matter of fact, George Ade, who wrote many Broadway hits, once remarked on that. He says, I lose a lot of my critical powers when I walk into a theater. Well, this is not true of many Midwesterners who are not part of that mystique of the theater. They go to see the play because going to the theater is not as mystical a thing. It is not so completely interwoven into his life. So when he goes, he merely looks at what he sees. And if he doesn't like what he sees, he walks out. He doesn't like it. Whereas the New Yorker will concentrate on watching Geraldine Page. He knows about Geraldine Page. He's been part of the Brooks Atkinson world. And so it's all much more wonderful than it really is. It's a kind of magic which is not surrounding this art object when it arrives out in the Midwest. It's shorn of all of it. And the point that was made by this magazine writer regarding Chicago and the Midwest was that these people are not really, they're not really taken in by professionalism and by gloss, by polish and by production. They are much more involved in something that goes beyond that. And I have to admit that there is some truth to this. That there is some truth to this. And I don't know where it comes from, but I do know that it is there. I remember my mother coming to New York, and she decided she was going to see a couple of dramatic shows. And she went to see two of them, one of which I will not use the names because I don't want to hurt anybody's production or play works. Anyway, she went to see the play, and after she came back, I was already caught up in New Yorkism. I was already involved in production. I already was impressed by sets, and I was impressed by lighting and all this stuff. But my mother was there watching the story and watching the people. And I said to her, how'd you like it, Ma? I mean, this is Broadway theater. And she sat for a while. She says, well, I don't know. I guess it was me. I said, what do you mean, Ma? She said, well, I guess it was me. I don't know. It seemed kind of silly. I mean, those people talk awful loud, and they say silly things, and they do silly things. I said, well, what do you mean silly things? She says, well, I mean, she should have just called the hospital right there the first 5 minutes when he said he was a dope addict like that, and it would have been all over. I said, but Ma, that isn't... So you couldn't get through. I mean, it was impossible to make the breakthrough. And I remember maybe there is a reason for this. I used to play golf when I was a caddy. Being a kid, I caddied on a city golf course and also on a private club course when Saturday afternoons would come around and I could get a quarter a round, which is what they paid in those days. And I used to caddy, and on days when there were too many caddies, which often happened, and not enough golfers, because at the time the Midwest was not steeped in golfism, there would be maybe 25 caddies and 4 golfers playing. And believe it or not, as incredible as it sounds, we would wander around the golf course and look for lost balls. Just wander around on those hot long summer afternoons. Just kind of wander around. And one of the things that we used to do would be at the 9th hole, which was a water hazard hole, we would sit down and fish for bullheads. Have you ever fished in the middle of a golf course? And we would sit there and fish for bullheads. And I remember one long, hot summer Saturday afternoon, I'm sitting on the mud bank fishing for bullheads right in the middle of the golf course, and a ball whistled overhead on its way to the 9th green. And the man came along. He's carrying his golf clubs. He's got a 4-piece set of Sears Roebuck specially matched wood irons. He's walking along there with the golf clubs are rattling in the bag. And he comes along the edge of the bank, looks down at me, and he says, "You see my ball go over here?" I says, "Yep, went over that way towards the 9th green." And he stood there for a while, and I'm sitting down there on the bank. He says, "Are they biting?" I said, "Pretty good, yeah." And I had a string of catfish. I had about maybe 7 or 8 catfish, and I held up the string, and he looks down towards the 9th green. He says, "Kind of hot for golf." I said, "That was a nice shot." "Yep, it's kind of hot, though." And so he proceeded to go in the direction of his ball. And he disappeared over the bunker. He was gone. I figured he was going on with his golf game. What he was doing, actually, was he was just going after his ball. He had decided to give up golf for the day. And 10 minutes later, he comes back over the bunker. He's got his ball in the bag, and he's got the clubs all stuck. He says, "You mind if I fish a while?" I said, "No." And he reaches down into his golf bag, and he had one of these folding telescopic steel rods, which he pulls out, complete with all the rest of the equipment, sits down there, he says, "You got any dough balls?" I said, "Yep." And I sat there and fished with a golfer for the rest of the afternoon for bullheads, and every 15 or 20 minutes, a ball would go whistling overhead. And after you've lived in this milieu for a while, you realize that people are out there in the darkness, and they're digging around under the rocks, sniffing around down at the base of the privet hedge, and they're all looking for a new kind of sin in one way or another. It's like this letter this kid wrote to me, and I think I should have some American type music to play behind this. That's American music. Great waves of strings about to play something, but never quite getting to the point. Shepherd, I'm living in Forest Hills, and I've got this father who comes home every week with a copy of Life magazine under his arm, and who every night at 7 o'clock after supper sits down in front of the television set and falls asleep by the middle of the 3rd show, stretches himself, says, "I guess I'll hit the sack," and disappears in the direction of his bedroom. My mother does approximately the same thing, only longer. She stays up through the 11:15 news. And I don't know what I do, actually. I wish I knew. I don't look at television much. I listen to you once in a while on the radio. And I don't know many guys who like to knock out fly balls. But then again, you sit in Forest Hills. And the other day, I see this big sign. It's an advertisement for a big department store. And the big sign says, we're having a giant sale to celebrate the wonderful way we live. And I'm wondering, Shepherd, whether they're talking about my old man, who it seems to me died maybe 5 years ago. He just hasn't stopped moving. And my mother is on her way. And I'm beginning to suspect that I'm going the same way. And so I look at that great big sign. I nod curtly. And I continue on my way back home after school. Shepherd, what do you say about this? I don't know, son. I don't know what to say about it. This is a letter from a kid. A 15-year-old kid. Why he writes me, I don't know. And so as you look out over that long, long line of waving hills, you understand. Speaking of waving hills, we have with us another one of our people, Ripple. Now, I don't know if you've tried Ripple or not, but I will say this, that once you have tried Ripple, you will never forget it. It is absolutely a completely unique wine. It is different from any wine I have ever tasted. And I have tasted wines in the Moselle Valley. I have tasted wines in the Argentia. I have tasted wines in the lesser-known provinces of Belgium. But this wine stands completely unique. It is different from all. And by the way, it comes in a little bottle. It's a little bottle about the size of a soft drink bottle. And it runs only 33 cents per each. And you can get it in red or white, and it should be served ice cold, absolutely ice cold. And it's made by Jell-O Wine in Modesto, California. And it's got a real place. And I would suggest you try it. It's Ripple by Jell-O. And he goes on, you see. He goes on trying to pluck that lute string. Oh, yes. But then we can't forget. We can't forget that glow against the sky. That growing glow against the sky that every Midwestern kid in northern Indiana knows, and it's emblazoned in his soul. You come out there on a quiet winter's night, and you stand in the backyard next to the garage, and you see the blast furnace and the open hearth flickering up there against the sky. And you know that somehow man's destiny is there written in the clouds, written in those scudding long lines of smoke that go echoing out over the lake. And speaking of the lake, I remember swimming in Lake Michigan, completely covered up and up to my hocks in the, well, whatever it is that the Lever Brothers plant throws out over that lake. Yes, it's been done. A great coating of palm olive soap and a great coating of Chip-So flakes. And you swim in that old lake amid the oil and the steel and the rising smoke screen of a Midwestern world. And you say, by George, I can see it happening. I can see it happening. But then again, on second thought, when you get out there and you begin to dry off and you're smelling like that oily water that you just came out of, you don't really know whether you are seeing it or not. And you just kind of sit and wait for it to happen. Whatever it is. I mean, we're all waiting, you know. I'm not quite sure who we're waiting for. But this is Moon Mullins here, friends. We'll be back again tomorrow night with the Pool Room Hour, immediately after the 9 o'clock station break on this, your friendly station.
This is WOR Radio, your station for news.
Well, that's it for Air Checks this week. We will have more Gene Shepherd next week. I can't always tell how long each episode is going to be, but we keep on doing this until we hit the last episode in 1977. Air Checks is normally a 3-hour podcast uploaded weekly and can be heard every Sunday on the K-Tai Radio Network. See you at the same time and same channel.